Name of this piece is called My Bitch Better Have My Money. My bitch better have my money. Through rain, sleet, or snow. My hoe better have my money. Not half, not some, but all my cash. Because if she don't, I'm gonna put my foot dead in her ass. Name of this piece.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the following program. I am your host, Joe Neerman, aka Good Lawgic. It has been a while. It's been a minute since I've had anybody on this show. Like, literally, I don't remember the last. I've been flying solo here so long. People think I'm a hermit. They're like, Joe, get out of your freaking cave. Don't you have any friends at all? And I do. I mean it. I really do. I really do. And here to help prove that point, I actually have brought a phenomenal guest who used to be regular on this show, and it's only through my own dilatory nature as far as my hesitancy to ever ask him to come on that he wasn't here. But when I commented on a phenomenal video that this young man made earlier today about NATO, he offered to pop back in and talk with me. And so it is my pleasure and privilege to bring to you all the legendary law of self-defense, Andrew Branca. How are you, my friend?
Hey, man, great. And thanks for that check, by the way.
Oh. I don't want people knowing I have to pay friends to hang out with me. You're not supposed to mention that during the show. Oh, my God. So this is our first time speaking, I think, since Trump has been inaugurated, right? It's been, I think, right? I don't think I've spoken to you since.
Yeah, and every once in a while, your show pops up on my feed when I'm relaxing in the evening, and I drop it a super chat and a joke or two. But yeah, this is the first time I think we've spoken face to face.
Yeah, and usually when I have Andrew on here, I'm talking about some legal issues, some case, some incident that happened. Because and for those of you who are unfamiliar with Andrew Branca, he is known as Law of Self-Defense. He is the country's premier expert on self-defense law, literally written the book on it, and has been a consultant in countless cases and scenarios, and in an advisory capacity to various technical productions. He's got quite the CV in that realm. So that's why he's become my resident guru with respect to self-defense law. And as you can imagine, when we're covering cases involving individuals who are engaging in violent activity, self-defense law becomes a preeminent factor, and that's his sweet spot. But talking politics with him is not something they'll sort of sprinkle in here and there, but bring him in here primarily to talk politics is, I think, that's not something that I've done before. But if that's what he wants to do, I would be here for it all the time. So, and I saw he put out this video today, which was really mostly of a political nature, as to all the bases as to why NATO is no longer serving the function that it.
Just say it. They're gay, Joe. NATO is gay.
NATO is how gay NATO became. And I can tell you this: he gave me facts. Yeah, so you see, and this is it's always an ongoing joke here as to whether or not he's going to be wearing the tie when he's on the air. I actually put a poll up when I announced this show to my community. I put a poll up, which was basically saying Branco no tie, Branco with tie. And as soon as I put that poll up, I look over to post onto X, and I see I got a DM from him saying I'm not wearing a tie tonight. So it's always a big deal with him as to whether or not he wears the tie, and people think he gets spicier without it.
Well, it's a different show.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
So when you're wearing a tie, that means you mean business,
right?
All right. So let's talk a little bit about. I was actually, if he wasn't going to come on the show, I was thinking of asking you for permission to actually just do a screening of that video, because there were a number of points that you brought up in there, which I never really considered. And I think they are highly relevant to the issue as to our continued relationship in NATO. And specifically, I'm thinking about if you could just underscore some of the primary points as to why it is that you think that that NATO is no longer the NATO that we initially signed on for. Because as you begin, you say this was a great concept in the early part of the Cold War.
I mean, arguably it was. You know, you could make that argument early on. I mean, we had World War II and we won. Europe didn't win. Europe took a beating, but we won. The Russians, the Soviets won with us. They were our allies. But then the Cold War started. We had nuclear weapons. The Soviets developed nuclear weapons, and we were at odds with each other. And of course, Europe is very concerned about, you know, they don't have an Atlantic Ocean between Russia and themselves. And America didn't want the Soviet Union entering Europe. So we said, well, let's set up a joint security alliance where if anybody attacks any one of us, they've essentially attacked all of us. But of course, the point was the Soviet Union, right? If they invade Europe, the United States was committed to come to their defense. And let's presume that made perfect sense at the time. I'm fine with that. But that was, I think, 1949 when NATO was founded. And in 1991, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. And if I were Russia today, and I was like, I'd be like, all right, well, listen, I kind of get it. You know, you guys wanted NATO when we were the Soviet Union and we were aggressive and expansionist, and you really had to worry about us. But why do you still have NATO when the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore? Because now we're the target, right? Russia is the target, not the Soviet Union, just Russia. And then when you expand NATO relentlessly from 12 original members to 30 members now, and you just keep pushing at the Russian border relentlessly year after year after year. If I were Russia, I mean, I just think about it. If I'm America, right? And China says, hey, let's set up a regional Asian defense network. And year by year by year, they bring in South American countries and then Central American countries, and then Mexico joins and Canada joins. I'm the US. I'm like, well, this is bullshit.
Yeah.
I don't want Chinese bases and military aircraft and soldiers 5 miles across the border into Canada or Mexico. That's not acceptable to me.
Right.
So when Russia says, wait a minute, Ukraine's going to join NATO, Ukraine with the longest, well, not the longest in terms of miles, but the longest vulnerable border. It's not like up north. It's like the longest vulnerable border with the Soviet Union. You're going to start putting military bases, NATO bases, CIA facilities, all this kind of bullshit on our border. No, that's a problem for us. And I have to say, I agree.
And frankly, when you consider the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the early 60s and how we responded to there being missiles in Cuba, 90 miles off the coast of Florida, and how this was considered, you know, a huge crisis for America, that, oh my God, they have these missiles that are pointing at us and they're so close. I mean, it's only a little further from the border of Ukraine to Moscow. So you can understand them saying you're going to be establishing this as a permanent thing, that they would be freaked out. And right. That's why, right?
And with Cuba, there's 90 miles of water, and you're not building up military forces on Cuba to invade the U.S., right? That's not going to be a thing. But Ukraine is big. Ukraine's 800 miles across. I mean, you could build up a lot of troops there, and they just drive them right across the border.
So Allegan's asking a fair question. What do you think BRICS is, their version of NATO, but not gay? As far as BRICS,
I just think it's impotent.
Right. I mean, I think
those nations are so diverse. They don't share the kind of historical and cultural foundations that you would want in an alliance that's really robust and sustainable. Their interests are too diverse.
Right. Well, I mean, Brazil's a nice big country,
which, by the way, is a problem with NATO. Because I talked about that too.
That was the point you raised, which I think is a great point that I hadn't really considered, which is when we first formed NATO. So there was a lot of cultural overlap there between the NATO countries, and that we here in America shared with them, as far as having a Judeo-Christian background and culturally Western, which is very different from being culturally Eastern or Middle Eastern.
And most Americans were descended from Western Europeans, right? If they weren't immigrants themselves, their parents or their grandparents were immigrants. I mean, my parents were Italian in Belgium.
Yeah. Yeah. From some portion of Western or Eastern Europe, that is where most Americans are coming from. So you can understand why it is that they're a more natural ally, that it's a matter of, look, we're protecting the same values that in Western Europe or even Eastern Europe as in America. But now with their importation of tens of millions refugees and immigrants streaming across the EU, that and taking to degrees no one ever considered possible political power, where they're not simply just these are not peoples who are coming in there and saying, oh, okay, we want to blend in with the native populace.
They're not assimilating. They're not integrating. In fact, they're getting preferential treatment. Just today, I saw in the news, Parliament in England adopted a set of rules where British people convicted of a crime will now be sentenced to longer prison terms than if you're a migrant and convicted of the same crime.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I don't understand some of their perspectives as far as what is a healthy culture, what is a healthy value towards propagating in our country are so ponderous that you're just like, how would any citizen of a country like that possibly be like, oh yeah, that's okay, this is logical, and the politicians are supposed to be representing their constituents. You ask yourself, are they I don't it's difficult to even understand how something like that gets generated.
Well, I think we know now, don't we? Now with DOGE, we know. Now with the USAID, we know that all these people have been being paid by trillions of dollars of fabricated US dollars to do things in their own financial interest and not in the interest of their constituents.
And in lieu thereof, as Sherry's pointing out here, you're saying perhaps it's time for us to consider an alliance with Russia. What do you think something like that might look like?
I think it would be easy. I got to be honest, much easier than Europe. Europe, we're dealing, like you look at the EU, the EU's, 27 countries, right? 27 fractious countries. And if you ever want to see, people be prejudiced against each other, just go to Europe. Go to France and ask them what they think of the Germans, and go to Germany and ask them what they think of the Belgians, and go to the Belgians and ask them what they think of the Romanians. I mean, they hate each other. It's a fractious union. They don't like each other. They're not a coherent group. And so for America to have to deal with this, it's like a kindergarten class of 27 kids who hate each other. Or we could just throw that in the garbage and deal with one Russia, one coherent Russia.
Okay, but let's tackle the elephant in the room, which is Putin. Because I mean, I'm going to ask you this: Do you think Putin is a trustworthy trading partner for America to get in bed with?
I don't think anybody's trustworthy. I think everyone's acting in their own national interest, and Putin would be the same way, and America should be the same way. And by the way, all of the EU is acting in the same way. That's what people should be doing. People are trustworthy as long as your interests align. Then everyone's trustworthy. But the moment they don't, nobody's trustworthy.
Which is
so. Listen, yeah. I don't think Putin's a nice guy. I think he's probably a terrible person. But that's not the question. The question isn't whether I like Putin. The question is, what's in America's national interest? What's in the interest of our nation? And if we were only willing to ally or partner with people who were perfect, we couldn't ally with ourselves.
Right. No, and that's my point. If we made it worth Russia's while, they're not self-defeating where they're going to harm themselves. And if there's a mutual benefit that we're benefiting and they're benefiting, I actually think that would be a way, frankly, to end the war with Ukraine. If Putin thought he had a healthy commercial relationship with the United States, I'm sure he would trade that in for seeing his army and Ukrainians pummeling each other. I'm sure he would far prefer that, because one of the things that Russia struggles with most is its economy. So if he thought that he could get fat and rich by trading with America, I'm sure he'd be down for that in a heartbeat.
It's just not hard to think of things that are of mutual benefit for exchange, right? So what's America got? High technology, chips, AI, rockets, everything Elon's doing, right? We have all this stuff that we can contribute to an ally. What does Russia have? Natural resources, hot women. I mean, you can't go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people look at Trump as being Putin's puppet, but I actually think we're in a position for Trump to make Putin his puppet.
You know, every time I see that, every time I see someone say, well, you know, if Trump may not be Putin's puppet, but it's hard to think of anything he would be doing different if he was. I'm like, you know, all that tells me is it's obvious that there's huge alignment between Russia and America. Yeah,
that there is. And part of the reasons I think that we've been trained over the last 12 years to think of Russia as being the boogeyman is because of the fact that he braces a more traditional perspective on Judeo-Christian values. So what do? They focus on the monstrosity that he's committed during the course of his life, and the double dealing that he's done with various countries, and they paint him as someone who's a threat to start nuclear war. And then, of course, it's easy for them to point to his invasion of Ukraine as unilaterally an evil thing to do, discounting the fact that, that you can look at it strategically. He felt cornered, that if I don't do this, that this is what's happening. When he went to Crimea,
it was wildly provoked by the United States. Wildly provoked.
Right.
We did that. We provoked that.
But the question then becomes, let's break down what we did
by
to
the way, Joe,
that.
before you continue, I just want to point out, as bad as Putin is Putin worse than Mao? Because we did a deal with Mao in the 70s. Nixon went to China.
Right.
We normalized relations with China.
Well, I'll tell you this. I would feel uncomfortable personally. I would feel uncomfortable normalizing relationships with China in 2025, because I think Xi is the worst person.
All the more reason to ally with Russia.
Right. And that to me, that is a big benefit. I was saying when the troops were aligning along the Ukrainian border, before they went in there, that this is a unique opportunity for America to form commercial relationships with Russia and keep them as our buddy instead of China's buddy, and basically using the incentive of that commercial relationship to say, hey, look, instead of going to war, let's all make money together. What did one of the things Russia really wants? They want that pipeline so they could feed natural gas to the EU, and they needed to cross Ukraine. And they're like, hey, look, if we would have granted them that, and maybe even charged them a fee, like a licensing fee, where America could have even taken a little taste of it for helping establish this relationship, that was an opportunity for us to literally make billions of dollars, if not more, and at the same time avoid war. But instead, Biden's response was, oh, let's start arming Zelensky and let's start this international conflict.
Right, because you always have, when Democrats are involved, you always have to ask yourself, because what they're asking themselves is, where is the most potential for graft? Where can we steal the most money? Mm-hmm. And there is enormous wealth to be stolen from any conflict, especially one like Ukraine versus Russia. I mean, we talk about the hundreds of billions of dollars the U.S. has put in, the EU, all that money's being stolen, folks. It's all a huge money laundering operation. Little drops come out of the pipeline at the end, at the war front. But all along the way, that pipeline of money, people are stealing money. Every inch of that pipeline, people are stealing money. They're getting wealthy. And those people want this to be a forever war. For them, it's in their interest that this war never ends. But that's not the same as it being in America's interest.
And speaking of that, I mean, they want it to be a war that never ends, but their people, as you point out, this is something I hadn't realized. I'm wondering where you found this, that in each of these countries, such a low percentage of their peoples are interested in actually fighting for their country.
Right.
So I don't remember, like he was talking about France and what other countries did you mention there?
Yeah, so I can summarize it. So basically, it's a map of NATO. It's a map of Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and Russia. And they did surveys where they asked the citizens, well, would you be willing to go into combat for your country? And Western Europe was all like average 20%. 1 in 5 would be willing to fight for their country. Eastern Europe, it was more like 30% on average. Russia was 60%.
Right.
And if only 1 in 5 Western Europeans are willing to fight for their own nation, what the F is America doing in a NATO alliance with those people where we would be called upon to die for them?
Yeah. I'm curious what percentage of Americans would say that they're willing to fight for their country. Have you seen anything on that? I was wondering that when you were reading off those numbers.
I find it hard to believe it would be less than Russia. Russia was 60%.
Right.
By the way, I saw someone, one of these NATO EU supporters today say, hey, Russia only has like 140 million people and the EU has 440 million people. We have way more people than them if it comes to a fight. And then I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but only 1 in 5 of you are willing to fight. And 60% of Russians are willing to fight. And when you do the math, it works out to about 90 million apiece. So the EU does not have this combat fighter supremacy they think they have. Plus, frankly, I think Russia's in the advantage. If you have 90 million willing to fight, and that's a majority of your population, or you have 90 million willing to fight, it's only 20% of your population. I don't think those are the same things.
And I'll tell you something. What you're talking about is all the scarier when we hear. I don't know if you saw the announcements that were coming out of the EU today. Did you see their announcements about gearing up for war? Check this out.
I just don't believe it.
check out Macron.
The war in Ukraine has led to huge numbers of lives lost. Our ally, the United States, has changed its position. And there are doubts about what will happen next. At the same time, even the United States is trying to impose tariffs on goods coming from Europe. And the threat we are witnessing from war and terror is not diminishing. Our peace, our security are more uncertain. We are entering a new era. The war in Ukraine has lasted more than 3 years. And since the first day,
they want to take us to war over this.
And impose sanctions on Russia. And that was the right choice.
Drag our
it's not
butts
just the people of Ukraine who are fighting for their freedom. It's also our security, which is under threat.
And this goes on for 13 minutes. I don't want to go through the entire thing, but it's not just them. It's also Germany.
Werden heute Nacht angesichts der unsäglichen Videos aus dem Weißen Haus
the unspeakable
unruhig
videos
geschlafen
from the White House.
Ich ehrlich gesagt auch.
She's talking
Leider
about what
war
happened on
das
Friday
kein
in the
schlechter
Oval
Traum,
Office.
sondern heftige Realität. Unser Entsetzen ist heute größer als zuvor, aber ebenso unser Commitment.
It's nice to see they got the Nazis jobs as sign language people.
Yeah, it's amazing that, I mean, I think it's more likely there will be a World War III. Much more likely there will be a World War III if we stay in NATO than if we leave NATO.
Right. I agree.
If you're afraid of World War III, and this is something I don't think I've ever mentioned on this show before, if World War III is your concern, you should be much more terrified about us actually staying in NATO, because these countries, and let's face it, I mean, reality is that France and Germany, together with the UK, are probably the big three as far as, politically powerful countries. There's certainly have amongst the highest populations in the EU and the stronger economies in the EU. So they're obviously going to be very influential in the EU. So you tell me, if they start committing, and UK said that they're committing to more and more billions of dollars to Ukraine. So the big three of the EU are all fighting together to basically say we're going to amp this conflict up and recommit ourselves to Ukraine in the wake of Trump saying, I'm not going to basically let you treat me like I'm your bitch here.
It's all nonsense, Joe. It's like now we have a pack of 6 chihuahuas barking. Listen, England, all of the UK, it has 40 working tanks. 40 working tanks. All right. Russia would lose 40 tanks in a day and come back the next day with another 40 tanks. The UK can't do that. None of these countries. Germany just announced today that they're running out of the means to keep supplying Ukraine with weapons. All of this is only possible as long as America is footing the bill. The moment we cut off the bill, they can bap all they want. They don't have the means to wage war against Russia or the political will.
Now, there are claims that we don't have a legal right to leave, that Trump unilaterally cannot get us out of NATO. That there was a statute that was passed in 2023 saying that the president cannot pull us out of NATO, and that he would need to have the Senate agree with him. I guess 60 senators have to sign off if he wanted to get out of NATO. You have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't care. So what? So they tell Trump you can't formally leave, you have to formally be a member, and Trump says, all right, well, we're going to put a 180-day pause on payments to NATO while we review to make sure everything's legitimate and there's no waste, fraud, and abuse. It doesn't matter if we don't. First of all, the ultimate moral responsibility for any nation is to serve the interests of its citizens. If NATO is not in our citizens' interest, it would be immoral for the nation to continue to be a member of NATO. And I think maybe the politicians, many of whom are, by the way, you know how many Democrat politicians and a few Republicans too immediately flew to Ukraine when we orchestrated the overthrow of their elected government to make sure they had feet on the ground, like Hunter Biden getting hired by Burisma, to make sure they were all getting their graft. Our politicians are corrupt. They're corrupted by the system. You know who's not corrupted by Ukraine? Trump is not corrupted. Elon Musk is not corrupted. And when you see these surveys of like Trump's talk last night, where 70, 80% of people were positive about Trump's talk, 20% were not. The Democrats have glued themselves to the 20% fraction of every polling issue that's out there. If Trump says we're just not doing NATO, forget about a formal departure. We're just not doing it. We're not paying anymore. Who's going to stop him? Where's the political capital to stop him? It doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you that I think that that certainly the refusing to finance, especially. I mean, we saw just today, Amy Coney Barrett and Chief Justice Roberts signed on with the left, saying that Trump has to keep paying out the billions of dollars in foreign aid. So,
but will he?
Well, I mean, so far he's been respecting the decisions of the courts,
but in a very clever way, Joe. So yeah. Listen, Trump has always said with this USAID money, he's always said, listen, if we owe the money, if it's legitimate, we're going to pay it. We just don't want to pay fraudulent claims. So we want this 90-day pause just to make sure, because until Trump came in, you might not believe this, but the U.S. Treasury was sending out money to foreign nations just because an invoice came in. Nobody was checking to see if a service was completed or if the service was completed to standard. If an invoice came in for $10 million, we sent out a check for $10 million. Nobody was checking anything. Right. So now Trump is saying, hey, we're just going to take a 90-day pause. When an invoice comes in, we're going to make sure, like, do we actually have a contract with this person? Do we actually owe them money before we send a check? If we owe them money, we will pay them. Yeah. But we're not going to pay the fraud. There's nothing wrong with that.
Well, with respect, and bringing it back to the whole leaving NATO thing, my position on this, and I'm curious, since you're an attorney, to get feedback from another attorney on this issue. My position is that under separation of powers, Congress doesn't have a right to start making new regulations as to what it takes to get out of a treaty. That as far as that the president has sole authority with respect to foreign relations, and if he says we're no longer part of a treaty, we're no longer part of it. The counter to that, is that, well, he doesn't have the authority to bind us in a treaty without congressional approval.
But those are two different things, right?
So why do you think that they're so different?
Because when you bind in a treaty, you're binding the American people to obligations. When you leave a treaty, you're relieving yourself of obligations. Those are two different things. And from the perspective of the American people, right? I owe a debt and then I don't owe a debt. Those are not the same things.
Mm-hmm. And it goes even further when you consider that you need congressional approval to declare war. You don't need the congressional approval to end the war. So it makes sense that to get into a war and commit the country to a war, commit the country to a treaty, you need to get this senatorial approval. Right. But to actually get us out of a war or get us out of a treaty, you don't need that. So I don't think that. I don't think that that's a. And there's so many things. If you want, and similarly, if you want to bring in a cabinet member, you need congressional approval. To remove a cabinet member, you don't need their approval.
Right.
So I don't think that that Congress has that right to start implementing that. However, I have concerns.
Joe, just to be clear, Congress. So we have three branches of government, right? We have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. They're separated for a reason, the separation of powers doctrine, because we don't want power concentrated in one place that could lead to tyranny. That's why the founders structured our government that way. Mm-hmm. There are places in the Constitution that allow for one branch to infringe on another branch, that the president can veto legislation, right? He can nominate people to the Supreme Court, but they have to be confirmed by the Senate. But the only places that you can infringe between the branches of government constitutionally is where the Constitution explicitly says so. If there is no specific provision to allow for this, any infringement of one branch or the other is unconstitutional.
Yeah, and that's why I was like, look, either he needed that authority from them before they passed that statute, or because and to leave any treaty he would need their approval. Or he in which case the statute doesn't do anything because he always needed their approval, or they have no jurisdiction to claim that they have a right to step in here.
That's the correct answer.
So either way, here's the tricky part of this whole thing. Here's the tricky part of this whole thing. Senator Marco Rubio was the one who introduced that legislation as part of an appropriations bill. And so now he's going to be in the very, very awkward position of explaining why it is that Trump doesn't have to listen to that particular thing.
But it's not that awkward. It wouldn't be that awkward for me if I were in his position. By the way, I will say in passing that I never liked Marco Rubio as a senator, but Trump has a gift for putting the right person in the right job. And as Secretary of State, Marco Rubio's being awesome. But if I were Marco Rubio, my answer would be, listen, when I was a senator, I had a very different perspective. Now that I'm a Secretary of State, answerable to the Article 2 elected president who is bestowed with 100% of the executive and foreign policy authority under the Constitution, I have a different perspective. And this is the correct answer.
Well, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you with respect to Trump's capacity for picking the right people for the right job. I think that's actually one of his biggest failings in his first term.
Pam Bondi.
Now, and some will already start to ask questions about Pam Bondi. I speculated that the reason Marco Rubio got the job is I think that he probably had a horse trading session in camera with the Senate, with the GOP Senate, and that he said to them, look, tell me what, I want certain people in, that these are critical to me. Tell me which one or two people you want in powers of position, and I'll nominate the people you want, and you confirm the people I want, and you stand behind them. So the way he got Cash, and I think they said we want Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, right. and he's like, okay, I'll give you that. You give me Kash Patel. I think it was that kind of horse trading because it doesn't make any sense.
But that happens, Joe. That has to happen.
No, I don't have a problem with it. It's logical. I'm simply saying the reason I came to this conclusion is because to me it makes no sense why he is naming little Marco to be his Secretary of State. And to me, that's a very weird choice for him to select. And then it's also very weird for me to see the Senate get behind a Kash Patel, who's such an outsider and so anti-establishment. And most of these senators on the right are all big establishment hawks. It makes no sense for them to agree to confirm him unless that was part of the deal. You give us Rubio, and we'll give you, and perhaps one or two other positions that that we want our guy in there, and then we'll give you, the Pam Bondi who we really wanted. We'll give you RFK and Tulsi and Cash,
Linda McMahon.
Yeah, exactly. We'll give you your folks, and you give us our folks. That has to be what happened here, because to me nothing else makes sense, because the Senate makes no sense and Trump makes no sense otherwise.
It was funny when you heard Trump's speech last night when he's talking to Marco Rubio in the audience, and he's saying, "Yeah, here's little Marco." He didn't call him little Marco, but here's Secretary Rubio, and he got 99 votes. And I'm really pleased about that, and it also makes me really nervous.
Yes,
what a great line.
Yeah. It should make him nervous. It should make him really nervous. It's because he's the establishment pick, and I think that right now he's going on with the program. We certainly need to continually scrutinize his work, because I think he can turn in a heartbeat. I think he's a career rhino.
None of these people are trustworthy. Well, I shouldn't say none. Rubio's not. Pam Bondi is not. They're not inherently trustworthy. They do what you want only as long as you're compelling them to do what they want. Do what you want. Pam Bondi is that way about Second Amendment issues. If she's swimming in political waters where red flag laws are popular, she's all for red flag laws. And then when she's swimming in political waters where that's the wrong thing to do, she's against it all of a sudden. So you can't trust them. You have to keep the pressure on them all the time to be aligned with your interests. There may be some that are different, that are kind of inherently aligned. Maybe Pete Hegseth, maybe Cash is more inherently aligned. But these more marginal players like Rubio and Bondi, Trump has to keep them on a tight leash. If he does, they're fine. They'll do whatever they perceive to be in their best interest. But if the leash becomes loose, the New York Times starts interviewing them, Vanity Fair starts interviewing them, you'll get very different decision making out of them.
We saw this from Bill Barr. For a while, the right was loving Bill Barr, and
it's the norm,
right?
The left is great at this. The left is great at co-opting leaders on the right in this way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and speaking of which, I mean, and another more evidence as far as some of his questionable choices is Amy Coney Barrett, and Kavanaugh also has been a disappointment, but Barrett has been just unbelievably establishment, and I have grave concerns that she's going to be there for decades and basically be trying to prop up the corporate state at every turn. Like, I can see her all of a sudden signing on with the left to say that Trump doesn't have the authority to leave NATO and that he has to continue funding them and that he can't just give them $1 like Let's Go Brandon was suggesting there, but that he actually has to continue funding them. I can see John Roberts doing the same thing. First and foremost, we have to pray. It sounds sad because everyone on the left is always saying it's 6-3 Republican. It's not. It's 3-3-3. There are 3 right, 3 left, and 3 establishment people. Those 3 establishment people are Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Roberts. And we need to pray that one of those on the left decides to retire soon, which most people are looking at Sotomayor. But I don't think it's 3-3-3. I think it's 2 groups. I mean, when you look at this decision this morning, right from the Supreme Court with the Hampton Dellinger of the Country Club Dellingers, was that the one this morning? No, I don't think they decided on the TRO.
Oh, the Court of Appeals did that, right? It was a TRO for USAID, right? That funding, right? Yeah. And they said, oh no, we're not going to stay the trial court order from this from this Canadian-born Egyptian migrant raised 8 weeks on the federal bench, inferior trial court judge saying, no, you have to pay $2 billion out in 36 hours. We're not going to stay that order. Look at who voted on each side, right? So the dissent was 4 men. 4 men. The entire dissent was all men. And the majority opinion was 5 women.
I see what you did there. I see what you. He's a chief justice. You don't care. I mean, I'll tell you that it's very frustrating, and frankly, that's those same 5 women. You have to have concerns about what they're going to do with respect to a decision for us to leave NATO. That they're going to basically all of a sudden start interpreting that he does need Senate approval.
Look, at some point, we have 3 branches of government. And the founders assumed that each of the branches would fight vigorously to assert their prerogatives and protect their prerogatives, their core and plenary powers. If we have an Article 2 executive president who's going to let himself get run over by the other branches, well, then we get what we deserve. Then we don't have an Article 2 branch of government. It's just a rubber stamp for all 833 federal judges out there. But if we have an Article 2 president who says, you know what? I can read the Constitution too. I'm an Article 2 officer under the Constitution, and my reading of this Constitution, it's not unique to the Supreme Court that they get to do constitutional interpretation. My reading of my responsibilities, my authority, and my duty under the Constitution is that I have 100% of the executive authority under this Constitution that governs our political order, and I took an oath to preserve the Constitution when I was sworn in as president. And I'm not going to let myself get run over by a bunch of black-robed, unelected, inferior trial court judges.
Here's the problem.
Born in Canada.
Here's the problem he has, though. Here's the potential problem he has. If he were to do that, if he were to say, I'm not gonna listen to the Supreme Court, the way, let's say, the state of Hawaii did with the Bruin case, that they say we don't have to listen to the Supreme Court. But let's say he did that. It's very feasible to have concerns that the Rhino GOP will join in impeaching him as violating his constitutional oath.
Okay, so what are the choices? That's a risk, right? Or he could just bend over and we don't have an Article 2 president anymore. That's the end of the nation.
I'm simply
You're right.
pointing
that is
out
the risk. I agree. That is the risk.
Because
but to me, you have to balance the risks. Either we're going to defend the institution of an independent Article 2 branch of government, or we're just going to concede that we don't have that anymore.
Right. I mean, I was hopeful at first that the nature of a Supreme Court justice to basically try and assert more power for themselves would play out in the sense of them saying, of there being a majority decision that, along the lines of what you were just saying, that some federal judge doesn't have the power to implement some sort of decision that affects nationwide economic policy.
Cannot enjoin the core and plenary powers of the Article 2 elected president, is
Right.
how I would put it.
And that
right?
perhaps the Supreme Court itself can do it. I would argue in the Constitution that even they don't have the right to do it.
I would agree, but I would be open to the argument.
Right, but at least they can make a case for it. But to say that any of the thousands of district court judges across the country have a right to basically trump whatever, pardon the pun, whatever decision that the president makes is,
or Congress, there's no reason to limit it to the president, right? Presumably the federal judges could say, well, we don't like the statute.
right. Elon met with Congress today, with the GOP of Congress. Did you see that?
No.
Yeah, he met with the GOP of Congress to talk to them about how to implement the DOGE changes into the next continuing resolution that they're planning, that they have to pass within the next 11 days or so. On March 14th, our funding dies. That's the expiry date for our current budget, which is an opportunity for them to redact from the budget all the stuff that Congress, that the DOGE has identified as being material waste. So, and that Elon sat down with them and supposedly even gave them his cell phone number so that he can continue and I'm sure they look at him as a celebrity, right? So, if you're some senator from Iowa, now you have Elon's phone number. That's kind of cool. So, that he would be able to work with them to help identify precisely what needs to be redacted from the federal budget. And once that happens, you would imagine that a lot of these interruptive measures by the courts would have no legal basis anymore, because they just wouldn't be funded because of because of a new budgetary statute, which would cut these wasteful spendings out. So
a couple thoughts there. Can I share?
Yeah, please.
So, all right. So one thought is there's kind of two ways to attack these overreaches, I think, by the judiciary. And one is kind of on the technical legal merits, right? Well, Your Honor, we don't have to pay this contract like you're ordering us to because we canceled the contract under the terms of the contract. So it's gone. So there's nothing for us to pay anymore, right? That's kind of a technical contract law. But the other argument would be a constitutional argument. Your Honor, you don't have the constitutional authority to enjoin me, the Article 2 branch president. You just don't have that. So those are two different arguments. I would much prefer the constitutional argument, because then it wipes away all these efforts. If every time we have to argue with a federal judge, it has to be a technical legal argument that only applies to the facts of that particular case, well, there's like 70 of these TROs and preliminary injunctions against Trump now. That takes a lot of time and effort and energy to overcome, a lot of political capital. And the second issue I was going to raise, I forgot.
That's all right. I mean, one of the suggestions that I brought up a few weeks ago, which I'd seen someone else suggest, and I think that it's appropriate. And it seems as if Justice Alito brought this up in his dissent today, which I didn't go through his dissent. Today, the decision that we're referring to is a 9-page decision, which is a 1-page decision from the court, and 8 pages of dissent signed by Alito. And Alito was joined in that dissent by Thomas, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. So basically he spells out that once this money is spent, it seems that there's very little likelihood that they're going to get that back, which is why he focused on it as a balancing of equities. When you're going for a TRO, just to remind all of you, and I've said this many times before, and I'll probably say many times again, there's certain check boxes you have to check off in order to say we're going to grant this TRO, because it's considered extraordinary relief. So we're not going to give that extraordinary relief unless you can check every necessary box. So the first necessary box is a likelihood of success on the merits. You have to show you're likely that you have a better chance of winning than losing this case if you want to have a TRO. If you can't check that box off, there's no TRO. You also have to show a balancing of you have to show irreparable harm,
right?
Which means that it's a harm that cannot possibly be remedied by a calculable monetary figure. So, for examples of irreparable harm, if your speech if you're stripped of your right to speak or any of your constitutional rights, how would anyone put a dollar figure that's accurate as to how that's impacting you? It's impossible because you don't know if it's affecting him, and that the effect is $10 or $10 billion that you're harming him and stripping him, even for a limited time, of that right. So those type of things are things that are considered irreparable harm. Also, if you can ever figure out the monetary damages, like let's say someone loses their business. So there's no way to know whether losing that business is going to cost them, $3 million. It might cost them $4 million, $7 million. No, there's no way to know what that's going to end up costing them. So that becomes something that's an irreparable harm. If it's not an irreparable harm, there's no TRO. Right. If it is an irreparable harm, you can continue to the next step, which is balancing of equities, which means which way is fairest here? Which way is granting the TRO seem more fair, or does denying the TRO seem more fair? If denying it seems more fair, then you don't check that box. And again, the TRO is denied. What Alito said is that because this money, once spent, is distributed out right away. So it seems very, to him, he was saying this is a lack of the balancing of equities is against granting the TRO, and that should have been denied on that basis. But really, that could have been remedied by a different method, which is something called the Injunction Bond rule. The Injunction Bond rule is when someone is opposing this TRO, they say, hey, look, if you grant this TRO and I win, so you're granting it against me, and I win, and it turns out that this TRO never should have been granted. This is the amount of harm that I'm potentially facing as a result of you granting this TRO. Here's a dollar number on the amount of harm as to how much I'm facing because you wrongfully granted this TRO. And in order to prepare and make sure that I'm going to be safe, the party that's getting the TRO has to put up a bond. Either deposit the money in the court, or they can go to a bonding company and have that company, front the money. They have to pay a lot of money for that bond, a massive percentage of the money, if not all of it, to that bonding company. And that way we have a pot that in case the TRO was never supposed to be signed, that pot would then recompense the party who was wrongfully enjoined via the TRO. So over here in this circumstance, even if you have all the rights to a TRO, and we say, yeah, you checked off all your boxes and you get your TRO, you still have to put that bond up because we don't know that you're going to win. We're not going to know until later, which means you have to put a bond up, which means what the United States should have fairly been able to compel the court, and the court doesn't have a choice on this. The court should have been compelled to issue an order saying, look, if I'll give you your TRO, but you have to put up a bond. And that bond is the $2 billion you're making them spend over the next week and a half. And then,
but that's why it won't happen.
Right. And that's why since the judge is basically ignoring that altogether. And frankly, that's what I thought Alito should have gone to, is saying, okay, look, if you want to give them that, then make them put up a bond. If they're not putting up a bond without the proper bond, you have no legal authority to grant a TRO. So that's where I thought he was going to go. He sort of went down that route, but I have grave concerns about this court. I'm not going to kid you. I have real concerns that this court that everyone thinks is so right-leaning. I think that Barrett and Roberts really don't like Trump. I think they really don't like him. And
that's not supposed to matter, of course.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think the Alito should have gone a completely different way. As you noted, when one of us, as an individual American citizen, if we're claiming that the government's violated one of our constitutional rights and we're asking for some kind of TRO, we don't have to prove irreparable harm. The irreparable harm is inherent to our constitutional right being violated.
Yes.
There is no world in which a transitory violation of my constitutional rights is acceptable. They are inherent to me as an American citizen. You're not allowed to touch them. That's irreparable harm inherently, if that's what's happening. Well, the same is true with the separation of powers doctrine. There is no period of time in which it's appropriate for the judicial branch to infringe on the core and plenary powers of the Article II president. 1 second is irreparable harm, because those are his core and plenary powers. So I think that's where Alito should have gone.
I hadn't thought of that, but that's a great point. That's a great point, that the violation of powers is an irreparable harm.
Instant. In fact, it should have been Trump seeking a TRO against USAID, trying to get this money paid. They're violating his authority, his powers.
Which is why he could have gotten a mandamus in theory to say that this is a violation of his separation of powers.
But of course, the judge wouldn't entertain that, because it's a judge who's been on the bench for 8 weeks. And another thing I saw in the comments is someone was saying, well, but this was just a TRO. You can't even appeal a TRO, which is the position the Court of Appeals took when the White House brought it there. Folks, this is all smoke and mirrors they're doing with this TRO preliminary injunction stuff. A TRO, properly understood, it's like you wake up in the morning and there's guys with chainsaws in your front yard. They're about to cut your tree down. And you run out and you get a TRO to restrain them from cutting your tree down. What the temporary restraining order is doing is saying, we're going to maintain the status quo. Everything stops. Everything freezes. A preliminary injunction is the next step that may or may not be granted. That's
within the next 7 to 10 days on the outside.
Right. So the TRO is transitory, and it just freezes things. What it's not doing is it's not ordering people to do things.
Right.
It's maintaining the status quo. A preliminary injunction, on the other hand, can order people to do things, but then it's appealable. When a court issues a TRO that's ordering people to do things, that's not a TRO. That, for all functional purposes, is a preliminary injunction that's immediately appealable.
Excellent. I hadn't thought of that distinction.
That's why I'm invited on the show, folks.
No, that's a great point. It's a really great point. It's a compulsory act as opposed to a restrictive act. And that's
all they're doing is they're issuing what they're actually doing is issuing preliminary injunctions and putting the TRO label on it so it won't be appealable. That's fraud. That's judicial fraud.
Although, I mean, I have seen things like I was once personally involved in a case where a caterer was trying to back out of providing for a function that was supposed to be happening at a certain date and time. And he had contractually agreed to it, and then he said, I'm not doing it. And I have seen a TRO where they said, no, you have, now that it's like 2 days before and you have all these people who are going on a cruise ship and relying on you catering, you can't just back out and leave them hanging. So I have seen TROs go into effect, which essentially are designed to compel someone to act in ways that they
and that's wrong. I'm not saying it doesn't happen,
right,
but it's wrong. That's not a TRO.
Interesting.
Für unsere eigene.
So,
more German.
No, I was trying to change over here because I wanted to switch over into a different thing here. The video that I referenced at the very start of the show that I was talking about is that Law of Self-Defense created with. You must have a video editor. You don't do this stuff yourself.
No,
You did this yourself?
I don't remember. No, we do. We do about half our videos are now produced. This looks produced. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. This looks.
I can never remember which one is which. Yeah.
This looked very professional. I was like, I don't know who his video editor is, but it looks as if they're zooming in on you. They're dropping out. The video that he put out today is called "Is NATO Worth It for the U.S. in 2025? A Bold Alternative." And I highly recommend. In fact, I'm going to put a link to this video in the description here, because I know that a lot of people may want to check it out, and I don't want anyone to struggle to find it. So I'm going to put a link in the chat, and I'll also put it in the description so that all of you can find it. Whoops, sorry about that. Did you? I'm wondering if there's anything else, because I know I only have you for an hour, so I don't want to,
Well, I'm not in a rush.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I just didn't want to impose myself on your show, but.
Oh no! You're fine. You want to stay here for the whole 2 hours? I'm happy to have you. I just didn't want to exceed the time allotment that you had given me here.
So it is funny. So just some inside baseball. So I did 3 shows today, And this NATO show was one of them. And one of my shows was reviewing the Trump speech from last night. I live streamed that for 2 hours. Nobody watched. Like 1,000 people showed up. The second show I did was another live stream. 50,000 people watched it.
Nice.
This NATO video we actually produced with our professional production people, and like 3,000 people looked at it. I mean,
I don't know why that. I can't figure it out myself either.
I can't. I don't know how that works either. So if you promote it, Joe, we'll probably double the number of viewers.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, I understand your pain, because part of the reason I don't produce videos is because I'm like, I must suck at it because people don't watch it.
It's so hard to know what's going to get. And by the way, it's not the people; it's the YouTube algorithm. It's what they decide they want to share it with. So
Yeah.
it's like YouTube is training us content producers to produce the content they want. Because when we do that, like I had a video a couple weeks ago, 1.7 million views. I mean, it was crazy. But then I do other videos, and YouTube's like, yeah, we Andrew's being misogynistic again. We're not going to share that one.
There's definitely some way that I feel like someone's leaning on the scales of the algorithm. But yeah, I'll tell you right now, I'm pretty sure that I'm the only person. I might be the only person to cross 100,000 subs without ever having a single video that had 100,000 views. To this day, I've never had 100,000 views on. I've appeared on things that have had millions of views, but I've never had on this channel a single. I don't think I've ever had anything that had 50,000 views. I might have had one or two, but yeah, I can never figure out what I need to do to trick that algorithm into actually working in my favor. They're very good at working against me. So I feel your pain. Because you would put in like a lot of effort to it. You're just sort of like,
I thought this NATO, I loved it. I thought
It's
this NATO
great.
video was going to be huge.
it's great. Yeah, no, it's really really good, and it's somewhat controversial because you're advocating for establishing alliances with Russia in ways that our country has never had before. So
what did we talk about? We talked about why was NATO founded originally, and does that still make sense now that the Soviet Union's gone, right?
Mhm.
We talked about Europe's changed. Europe today, folks. I don't know how many of you travel, but if you go to London or Munich today, those cities, you might think you're in Africa. They don't look like London or Munich anymore. They're completely demographically changed. So are we even partnered with the same people anymore? I don't think we are. I think Europe in 2025 is a profoundly different culture and society than it was in 1949. Of course, the Soviet Union is gone. Europe isn't what it used to be. And it's very dangerous to be involved. So some of us, when we were growing up, maybe this is true for some people in the audience, you might have had like that one sketchy friend, like maybe he was dealing drugs a little bit, or he wasn't a normal working guy. It's like he was involved in some sketchy stuff, and you knew that if you hung out with him long enough, you were going to get involved in sketchy stuff, right? That's Europe right now. That's Europe. That's NATO. If this is how we got into Ukraine. They get themselves in a mess, and suddenly we're involved. Why? Why don't we do what our mom told us to do, and don't hang out with people who are going to get us in trouble? Because that's what the EU is today. It's just people who are going to get us in trouble because for some idiotic reason they get into a fight, and we throw our whole stock portfolio and wallet into that fight. That's not in our interest. What's that fight have to do with us? What does Ukraine have to do with us? Except that it's a giant money laundering operation for our homegrown politicians.
And
of course,
they're treating this non-NATO country as if it is a NATO country.
Right. And because it's a huge money laundering operation, the people making money from this, and it's a lot of money, for them, they want this to be a forever war. It can never end. If it ends, the money ends. And even worse, if it ends, there's a possibility that Ukraine could, they don't have an elected government right now, right? Zelensky was elected once, and then his term was up, and he stayed president without elections because of wartime exigency. But he is not an elected president right now. If Ukraine elects a president that makes him accountable to the citizens of Ukraine, and they start looking at, they start asking, hey, the US gave us 350 billion and Europe gave us 150 billion. Where's all this money? And it's all been laundered and stolen. Well, a lot of people who think they've just been instant millionaires could be looking at prison for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So they can't
Not to
afford
mention-
to have this end.
Not to mention that he's in the last 5 years. There are three figures who have become risen to. When I say risen, who have really received international acclaim. One of them is Trump, but the other two, and he's gotten nearly as much hate as he's gotten love. The other two are Dr. Anthony Fauci and Vladimir Zelensky. I think it's difficult. I think it's difficult to come up with any other person in the last 10 years who has risen to that type of prominence. The day this war ends, Zelensky's star fades. He has every incentive. He is now he's viewed as a mythical messianic type figure by millions of people. Millions of people look at him as a mythical messianic figure. And the day this war ends, all of that dies. And I don't know if he's taking money or he's not. You have to certainly question where billions that supposedly have gone missing went. And certainly he had access to billions, and they say that there are many tens of billions that went missing. So you sort of have to ask yourself, especially when I was looking at the way he dealt with Trump, where he comes in there and says, I'm going to sign a mineral deal. He didn't have to come to Washington. He could have signed it from Europe, but he said, no. I must come to the Oval Office. And then when he shows up in the Oval Office, he's completely belligerent, making much higher demands, because there's multiple stages to the deal. The first part is, okay, Ukraine signing off on us getting minerals, and we're going to be investing in Ukraine, and we're going to be doing all of that. Then the next stage is that there's going to be some sort of peace deal that's going to come along, and what anyone in his position would recognize is I have advantages by having America invest in my country and having them, looking out that we can extract these minerals, many of which are at or near Russian-controlled current territory that is currently Russian-controlled. So inherently, Trump is going to have to be putting some sort of military in there. He's going to have to Putin's going to have to know that if he goes anywhere near those areas, that he's in trouble. Now, if you're Zelensky, you have to say, okay, but I have an 800-mile border, and that's basically covering 10 miles of terrain. That's not covering 790 other miles that I got to worry about here. So I can understand him saying that it's not really a guarantee. I get that. But the idea is that we're starting to take steps in the right direction. And if he can say, I want Trump to get guarantees from Zelensky that he's not going to be invading for the rest of his life into our country, in that case, you have some sort of guarantees, and you're putting out the fire that your citizens are not being put into a meat grinder.
But Trump addressed that during the exchange with Zelensky. He's like, but anything could happen. Anything could happen. Of course, something can happen. And when it happens, we'll address it. But you can't plan for every one of a million contingency events today.
Right.
Today, you make the deal you can make today.
Precisely. But he didn't. Instead, he talked down to them, implying that they don't know Putin as well as he does, and he was trying to overtalk them and eye rolling and shrugging, like he was basically acting like a little punk, where he's like, no, I'm not going along with this over here, and you don't understand, and I know better than you, and I've been dealing with Putin, I know him, and have you ever been to Ukraine? Have you been to Ukraine? When is the last time you visited? And it's basically talking to Trump and Vance as if they were idiots,
as if they were subordinate to him.
Yes, and frankly, part of the reason I think that he had that audacity is because he's been lauded as a mythical type figure for the last 3 years. That all these different world leaders have been literally kissing his ass, and I think that he feels very, very entitled. And then when you have these NATO nations who are our friends, they're supposed to be, we got your back if you're ever attacked by Russia. It's supposed to be our friends. They see this conflict and immediately jump to Zelensky's side. You have to ask yourself, what the hell is happening here? Unless he knew that was going to happen, he knew that they were going to have his back over Trump. It felt to me like it was a setup. Like this was all set up to make Trump look like the bad guy. That and that he's either going to act like Zelensky's bitch, or he's going to be the bad guy. That's essentially what this whole thing felt like to me.
I think you're right. I think that was the orchestration. I don't think it's up to Zelensky. I think Zelensky at this point is just a puppet. I think he's like a small time hood who got involved with big time mafia bosses and suddenly realizes, holy crap, if I make these guys unhappy for a second, they're going to end me. This is no longer like going to be a fist fight in the corner. I'll just be done. I think Zelensky comes out and he says things that he thinks make sense to him. And then he gets a phone call from the real bosses. And they're like, what the F are you saying? No, this is the words you're supposed to say. That's why he keeps 180 flipping his script. That's not the conduct of someone who's in charge of his own affairs. That's the conduct of someone who's not very bright, not really in control, and is getting orders from other people.
Well, it could be. You see, here's the thing. I think it could be that he wants to portray himself as if he's not doing what he's doing. He is trying for peace, and that's why I think that we have this conflicting. You're saying the conflicting thing is because he's being pushed around like a puppet by these other
Right.
powerful figures. I'm saying. I think that the back and forth is he's waffling so that he gives the appearance of someone who's seeking peace while inherently not wanting any peace at all. And that he basically wants everyone to think that he actually cares about peace, but that he recognizes that this war personally benefits him in ways that few people can actually imagine.
So I favor the puppet theory, but if the theory is actually that he's so just emotionally immature that he can't behave coherently with world powers, then he just needs to be removed from the equation, and someone responsible needs to.
No, I don't think it's that he can't behave. I think he chooses not to because it's personally beneficial to him to act the way he did. So it's not a matter that he lacks the control. I think it's
it may be beneficial to him, but is it beneficial to Ukraine?
No. I think Ukraine
Ukraine
hates
needs
him.
to do something.
But Ukraine doesn't know how to get rid of him.
I
saw somewhere that his popularity there is under 40%. He's way more popular in the EU than he is in Ukraine. And rightfully so. If you're sending your family to a meat grinder against Russia and there's no real efforts towards trying to resolve this in a way that's peaceful, I mean, you have to ask yourself how long are they going to keep, sending their sons and brothers and children out to die in Putin's war machine.
Right. So your husband went out to walk the dog, and the next day he's blown up by a Russian drone, right? And your husband's gone. So at some point, I'm sorry, but that sounds like a Ukraine problem, not an America problem. Like Ukraine needs to solve their problem.
Yeah, but I mean,
they have a lot of men under arms.
Enough said. Zelensky thought he was still talking to Biden rather than to real adult men. I mean, that could be it. It could be that, he thought that he would bend over. But basically, he put Trump in a position where Trump either was going to act like he was Zelensky's bitch or that Trump would look belligerent.
But unless Zelensky's on drugs, maybe he's on drugs. I don't know. So when I'm a child of the 1980s, I came of age in the 1980s when cocaine was everywhere. And when I see Zelensky in the Oval Office constantly doing his face touching thing, I immediately think that guy's on cocaine. but maybe he's not. I don't know. Yeah. I haven't done a drug test on Zelensky, but either he's on drugs or he's so stupid that he can enter a room where Donald Trump is president, meet that guy, talk with that guy
in his office,
and think, I'm going to make that guy my bitch. And to me, that's not credible. If you just watch Trump on TV, that's not happening.
I think they might have looked at it. They say for a lawyer, the best questions are the one that you don't really care what the answer is. I think he looked at it as this is a win-win scenario for me because I'm going to have the Democrats screaming that Trump is a jerk. I'll have the entire EU screaming that Trump is a jerk. I'll have the EU throwing billions of dollars at me and throwing support, or I'll make Trump my bitch. But either way, this is a win-win scenario for me to actually start up with Trump on camera.
Well, that was poor thinking.
Well. Short term, it seemed to work out for him. So
Trump just cut off all aid to Ukraine.
Yeah,
today.
Yeah, I know that was
the day after. I mean, come on, that's pretty short term. That's not positive,
right? That's true. That's true. I think I'm sure he's hoping that the court's going to back him on this, but who knows?
When the Ukrainians who are actually fighting the Russians, like firing the guns and launching the artillery and firing the mortars, all this stuff, when they hear no more money's coming from America, what do you think they're thinking? the EU is going to step up and make up that $350 billion difference? That's not happening.
Well, I don't know how much of that 350 billion is left to come out of our pocket. And Trump made some great points as far as it being ridiculous that the money that EU gave is secured and our money is not. Like theirs is a loan and ours is a gift, which is just insanity. It's really insanity. I mean, even if, people think that when you make a loan, loan, it doesn't matter if you call it a loan or a gift, it never gets paid back. Apparently, I read recently that I read today, in fact, that within the last couple of years, England finally finished paying us back for the Lend-Lease program that we put in World War II. So, yeah, they do pay it back eventually. Might take a long time, but you at least getting that money back. But over here with Ukraine, there's no reason. It was a grant. It was a gift that we gave them.
So what Trump is basically, of course, that was a Biden deal, right? So what Trump is basically trying to do is say, well, Zelensky, I don't know how to tell you this, but we don't give a shit about that. We don't give a shit about what Biden told you. As far as we're concerned, it's a loan. And we're going to get it back in these mineral deals that we're trying to make with you. And by the way, when you give us interest in your minerals, that gives us interest in securing you to make sure we continue to have access to those minerals. But we're going to get our damn money back.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we're ever going to get.
I think we should skip it. I think Trump's correct right now. He should say, you know what, Ukraine?
Keep your
Ukraine seems like a Ukraine problem. You deal with it. Europe, you deal with it. Russia, would you like to go out and get a cup of coffee? Because Russia has plenty of rare earth minerals too. They have plenty of natural resources. It's not that hard to get there. It's right over the polar ice cap.
Yeah. And that to me is if he does that though, I think he feels like politically he's the left has basically portrayed him, as I said, as being Putin's puppet. But I think that, to me, when I look at this relationship, I actually look at it as he knows how to control Putin in ways that others have never figured out before. So I'm trying to figure out what Project Com is saying here. The best deal is Trump distancing, coming with no agenda. He states he's happy to Russia, China, because he wants to grow the U.S. in any territory taken by Russia. I mean, superpowers can grow. That way, we're going to start conquering countries. We're going to go in and take Greenland. China would lose a lot. I'll tell you that. Speaking of that, he touched last night on Greenland. And
Greenland's easy. Greenland. There's no Danish people in Greenland. They're all like Eskimos. They're all like native residents of Greenland. Why don't they have the right to choose their own future?
I don't know.
Is Denmark a colonizing nation? Isn't colonizing bad?
Apparently.
Right.
Apparently they are.
America should just say Greenland, take a vote. Take a vote. You're allowed to. You have the human
Danish
right
control,
to choose
Danish control or American control.
Right. And of course we can, and we'll pay each of you $1 million and a hot Russian chick.
That'd be funny. Be really funny.
There's no way that America cannot have Greenland if we want it. If we want it, it's just a negotiation deal. And who's better at negotiation than Trump? He just goes to Greenland and says, listen, all you native people, the Danes have been treating you like shit your entire lives. There's nothing but alcoholism and poverty here. We will give you industry, education, hospitals. We'll give you everything. As Trump said in his speech, you will be wealthy. Why wouldn't they take that deal? And if they want to take that deal, who the F is Denmark to tell them they can't? They're going to stop us? They're going to stop them?
Now do Panama.
Oh, Panama's even better. It's just ours. Sorry, we owned it. We dropped our wallet over by the bar. We're back. We're here to get it.
I agree with you that all these issues are really just, it's really just negotiation.
We like to think, especially if we go to law school and stuff like that. Like I took classes in international law. We like to think it's like this solid body. It's not. It's just people. It's just human beings making negotiations, making deals. Treaties are broken all the time. Treaties are made all the time. It's all whatever's in. It's like dating in college. It's whatever's in everyone's interest at the particular time. That's all it really is. All this international law bullshit is just bullshit.
Let's turn to domestic. We covered international. I think we explored that. What did you think of his speech yesterday?
I just laughed and laughed and laughed. I thought it was great. What part of it was I supposed to not like?
No, I'm just wondering.
To me, the funniest part was I felt so bad for J.D. Vance and poor Mike Johnson, because I hope they don't skip leg day because those guys were hopping in and out of their seats like every line was a standing ovation.
There was a lot of standing ovations. There was.
And I think the Democrats did themselves a terrible disservice with their ridiculous performance there, because, I mean, they wouldn't stand for the cancer kid. They wouldn't stand for the raped girl by the illegal immigrant. I mean, I swear to God, the Democrats seem to have adopted this view where it's like, if there's an 80-20 position, we're going to drive our stake into that 20% part. We're going to take that minority position every single time. I mean, I don't understand how they stay a coherent political party.
A lot of people are saying this is the death of the Democratic Party. Let me show you, if in case you didn't watch it last night, you didn't see the Democrats last night. Here is a recreation of the Democrats from last night.
This is my fifth such speech to Congress. And once again, I look at the Democrats in front of me and I realize there is absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or to make them stand or smile or applaud. Nothing I can do. I could find a cure to the most devastating disease, a disease that would wipe out entire nations, or announce the answers to the greatest economy in history, or the stoppage of crime to the lowest levels ever recorded. And these people sitting right here will not clap, will not stand, and certainly will not cheer for these astronomical achievements.
And they wouldn't stand or cheer or applaud for astronomical achievements. They wouldn't stand or applaud for a little black kid who survived multiple surgeries. He's 13 years old. He was told 5 years ago he has 6 months left to live, and he survived. And this fighter survived multiple brain surgeries and was made an honorary and had a lifelong dream of becoming a cop, and was made an honorary member of the Secret Service by Trump last night, even getting some little badge.
And who hugged that little black kid?
Remember the Secret Service.
The white head of the Secret Service. The white Trump administration hugged that kid like he loved that kid.
Yeah.
When he gave him that badge, that honorary badge.
Yeah. It was such a beautiful moment. It was such a beautiful moment. Like how anyone could not be moved by that, and they literally could not applaud.
But it exposes them, because all the Democrats really care about is power over other people. And so whatever serves that interest is fine with them. But if it doesn't serve that interest, they literally don't care. It's like a dog looking at a piece of meat and a dog looking at a piece of cardboard. It doesn't care about the cardboard. It doesn't have necessarily animus. It just doesn't care. Democrats don't care about anything unless it's giving them power.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, speaking of power and them thinking that Elon has way too much power. So as I mentioned earlier, Elon met with the GOP Senate today. I just want to check out this quick report with you here. So
just talked to a number of senators who were left that closed door meeting, and really the upshot is that they want more of a say in the process over how these cuts are being implemented. And there's now growing talk.
No, they don't.
About putting together a legislative package to essentially codify the cuts that so far have been done administratively. And a lot of those cuts have been rejected by the courts, most notably just earlier today, the Supreme Court halting this effort to essentially stop providing funding through the USAID program. Now, there's some discussion about doing that through a process that would actually allow the Senate to adopt those cuts through a simple majority, meaning Republicans could do that on their own. And I'm told that when those discussions would happen behind closed doors with Elon Musk, Musk was open to this idea. That is what senators said, including Senators Lindsey Graham and Ron Johnson, in the immediate aftermath of this meeting.
You need a system where if you see something that you think is not what it was intended,
say something.
He said,
see something, say do something.
He said, I want to keep the momentum. But from a political point of view, we need to take the work product of DOGE and put it in a rescission package.
Elon it's very upfront. So they're moving fast. It's not going to be perfect. There'll be mistakes made, but we'll correct those mistakes very quickly, and setting up a process so he can and his team can be contacted quickly to reverse mistakes.
And one of those processes is actually to provide members with a direct way to contact him. I am told that in this closed door meeting that he actually gave out his cell phone numbers to the Republican senator in the room, and really urging them to call him directly if those concerns, they want to raise any concerns, want to coordinate with them better, because that has been one of the major concerns among Republican senators and congressmen alike, is that they're getting blindsided by some of these cuts. They're learning about that through the news media. They're getting angry calls from their constituents, and they want to have a better sense of how this is all being done and actually weigh in directly with him. So Musk is indicating that he wants to try to collaborate more with Republicans and perhaps give them a vote in this process too. That's something the White House, of course, would have to sign on to as well. But definitely some interesting.
You see that hot blonde, the hot blonde next to Elon?
Over these cuts and trying to figure out.
I mean, he is the richest man on earth.
Look at her looking at him.
He's the richest man on earth. So
they weren't together. They were in opposite eye.
Yeah, there was a bar between them.
Right,
yeah.
but she was looking at him like that is going to be Elon's 15th baby mama right there. Like he offered her a bottle of water. It's like, would you like a bottle of water and a fetus? Talk about the price of eggs. It's like for Elon, it's like,
oh my
0.
God, stop it. Stop it. Wait, price. Oh my God. See, this is no tie Branca. No tie Branca all of a sudden comes in with the zinger about talking about fertile women and the price of eggs.
By the way, I did want to bring something up. So I had forgotten earlier a point I wanted to make, but this reminded me of it. So for years, I think the Democrats have not actually had grassroots popular support. I think they've been supported by a lot of this USAID, NGO money, our stolen tax money funneled through these left-wing groups to create a false impression, especially funneled to the media. The media was getting a ton of this money. So all the media was giving the same message: Democrats are great, Democrats are great. That money's going away now. And you know who may be replacing that? Elon Musk, richest man in the world, can go to any of these wavering GOP politicians and say, tell you what, if you vote for Kash Patel, there will be $1 billion in your election fund to make sure you retain office.
I don't think he's got to pay $1 billion. That's
whatever, $1 million, 100.
Right.
And I mean, politicians are cheap. You can generally buy them for 10.
Yeah, they say you could buy a senator for like 20 grand.
Right. So, but he's got them, whatever it is. Elon's got the money. If anybody has the money, Elon has the money. And because I was really amazed, I have to say, did any of Trump's nominees, other than Matt Gaetz, write in? Did any of them not get confirmed?
No, they all made it.
And some of them, let's be fair, some of them were, I mean, they were on the edge. Kash Patel is on the edge. Robert Kennedy Jr. is on the edge. Linda McMahon for Department of Education, which she's promising she's going to eradicate, that's kind of on the edge, right? For that kind of appointment. And he got them all. And I can't help but wonder what kind of deal making was happening behind the scenes where you could consistently get, and we know some of these rhinos suck, you could consistently get all of them.
That's why I'm telling you, it has to be that he gave them Rubio. It has to be. I think he gave them Rubio as Secretary of State.
He guaranteed them re-election. He said, if you have a problem in re-election, you look like you're running into trouble, I will financially back you to make sure you get re-elected.
Could be. I mean, like I said, there was definitely horse trading. They knew coming in there that even though they might not like this guy, they're going to vote for him, and that they weren't going to scuttle these nominations. There had to have been some talk. Probably around the time when they were picking the GOP leader, when they got Thune in there in the first place, which was a person who's he's a lifelong rhino. He's obviously going to become the most influential member of the Senate. Once he ascends to that position. So you sort of have to say that had to be part of the whole thing, because Trump ended up endorsing Thune. And why is he endorsing Thune? Another part of it has to be, do we believe that every one of these Republicans is not dirty? I don't believe that. Oh, no. Right. So does part of the guarantee have to be, listen,
we know some of you have been taking the same NGO money that the Democrats have been taking, right? It was just sitting there. We get it. It was easy. If you vote for our candidates, we're not going to go after you.
Could be. I hope so. I hope that's what
whatever it takes to win, right? Because
Right.
that's how the Democrats would do it.
Yeah. No, I hope that.
Welcome back to Live Now from Fox.
I hope that's what it was. But I have some questions for you about some changes that are potentially in the works with respect to our economy, and I want to get your thoughts on this since you're coming in here, weighing in here on the politics. So first and foremost, there was a report that came out today about the IRS being slashed. So this is where I want to start. I'll start here.
They're only promising to slash it by 45%, Joe. It needs to be slashed by 145%.
Well, we'll get to that in a moment.
Live Now from Fox, and good morning to you if you're just now tuning in. This Wednesday morning, we're following some breaking news as it relates to the Internal Revenue Service. This coming in from the Associated Press. They report the IRS is drafting plans to cut its workforce by as much as half through a mix of layoffs, attrition, and incentivized buyouts, according to two people familiar with the situation. The people spoke on condition of being anonymous because they weren't authorized to disclose the plans. The layoffs we're learning are part of the Trump administration's efforts to shrink the size of the federal workforce through billionaire Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency. We're told this is expected to happen by closing agencies, laying off nearly all probationary employees who have not yet gained civil service protection, and offering buyouts to almost all federal employees through a, quote, deferred resignation program to quickly reduce the government workforce. A reduction in force of tens of thousands of employees would render the IRS dysfunctional, this coming from a former IRS commissioner. The federal tax collector employs roughly 90,000 workers total across the U.S., according to the latest IRS data. People of color make up 56% of the IRS workforce. Women represent 65%.
No one cares.
No, I care about it. Joe, I am convinced that the federal workforce has become nothing but a giant daycare program for over-credentialed, underqualified, middle-aged women who timed out of the dating market without getting a husband, and now they have Uncle Sam as their husband. That's why 65% of the federal workforce is these do-nothing, make-job women. Sorry.
Well, that's
that?
okay. Yeah, you did say that. You did say that. When they say that the IRS only has 90,000 employees, I'm like, wait a second. So when Biden added on 78,000 employees, he built it from 12,000 to 90,000. I was very confused by this because is that really what happened there? That we went from 12, because when they said the 90,000, does that include the 78 that Biden added in just a year or two ago?
Joe, how many people live in the U.S.? Say like 340 million. That's about a rough. Okay,
I think citizens. I think non-citizens were probably
another 100 million.
I mean, we're at least 370, right? I mean, there's 20 million over the last 4 years, and that doesn't count the people who there were some people who got in here under Trump, and some people under. I mean, they've been streaming across here for a while. So I don't know about you, but I know that either I have to file my own taxes or I have to pay someone to do it for me, right? Mm-hmm. How am I not an effective employee of the IRS? I think the IRS has 340 million employees. They're not calculating my taxes for me. They make me do that, or they put me in jail. Okay, fine, but as far as being on their payroll, that they. Are you not astonished by that number, that it's only 90,000 when you consider that he added on 78,000 employees to a workforce that must have had 10 to 15,000? How is that? That made me all the more astonished by that number when I hear that it's only. I assume that it's like, it had 100,000 people already and he was tacking on 70. I couldn't believe that he was increasing the size of that workforce by a factor of 800%. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
So let me ask this question. So we all visualize things in our head, right? So if I ask you to visualize a cowboy, you have an image in your head, right? Or a firefighter, you have an image in your head, or a policeman, you have an image in your head, or a nurse, you have an image in your head. If I ask you to visualize the building in which the IRS resides, is it not like a giant black monolith, right from 1984? I mean, isn't right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This thing should not exist in American society.
Well, and I want to be clear on the record here that I wholly endorse and support the IRS. The IRS is filled with wonderful, talented, hardworking individuals, and nobody in the IRS is considered an unnecessary or extraneous part, and all of them are hardworking individuals. But so, and I completely dissociate from any of the statements of my guest here, which may be considered in any way aggressive towards any IRS workers. Now, yeah, but I'll tell you that I think that first and foremost, I don't know why we don't lay off the 78,000 who were brought in. Like, I don't understand. If you're telling me that he increased it by 78,000 and we're cutting half of the 90,000, that means we still have 30,000 new workers that weren't there 5 years ago. So I don't look at that as a big win. But there's a new report now as far as there being notions that we can get rid of our tax code altogether. So none of us 340 million will be working for the IRS anymore. And this is a short claim that in lieu of paying taxes, that taxes will be raised via tariffs.
Tariffs are going to drive America better. Remember, we pay taxes into the Internal Revenue Service. Wouldn't it be amazing to stop paying taxes to the Internal Revenue Service and have the External Revenue Service of Make America Great Again replace our taxes? That's the goal of Donald Trump, and I think he's going to hit there. He's going to do everything he can to make that happen. Lower our taxes. No tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on seniors. Come on. This is an amazing country, and we are winning it.
I'm so aroused right now.
Okay, so I think most of America is behind the no tax on tips thing. I think most of America it supports that. And no tax on overtime or on Social Security. I think most people are in favor of that. Do you really think it's viable that we could actually replace our current tax system, our Internal Revenue Service, with an External Revenue Service by basically saying that all of that money is going to come in via tariffs?
Yes, absolutely. When we have massive nations, our largest trading partners, like Canada and Mexico and Europe, 70-80% of their GDP is from exports to the United States. We're giving them access to our American markets to make all their money. Are they going to stop selling into American markets? No, they would lose all their money. So yes, they'll continue to sell in, or if the tariffs make their products too expensive to sell effectively in America,
that's my thought.
They will bring their production into America so they don't have to pay the tariff. But it still will be effectively an external revenue service, not every single American having to file an income tax return every year.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's think through what you just said here, okay? Because I have all sorts of questions on that. If it works, as far as in with respect to getting your European manufacturers to start building plants here in America, if it actually is successful in that regard, so in that case, it's that much less tariffs we're raising. Where is the money coming for our government?
Well, if we have that much more industrial capacity in America, we're making that much more money in America, a 3% income tax might make sense.
Okay, so you're saying that basically we would make our economy thrive.
If it's so effective bringing in foreign industry that the tariffs are not being financially productive anymore, then maybe we do need an income tax.
Because, I think it's very tough to sort of figure out exactly where that line is. Where is that line as far as the right tariff amount that it's still viable? That because if you're looking at it as this is how we're going to raise money for taxes in lieu of taxes. Let's assume they don't come here. And if you make tariffs too high, in that case, it's going to be the cost of the goods are going to be too expensive and no one's going to be buying them, in which case we're not going to be getting anything. If you're
what do we have to buy from foreign sources? What do we have to pay tariffs on?
Well, I mean, what products do we need? I mean,
what can't we make in America?
Well, I mean, there's certain things. I don't know what you mean when you say what can we not make?
I mean, okay, coffee. So we can decide coffee gets a 0 tariff, right? So that solves that problem.
Okay.
Right.
I'm saying there's certain products that are very popular. Avocados. There are certain products
most avocados that we buy in America are grown in California. So they're domestic.
So I could be mistaken on that. That's a fair point. But I'm saying is, your European car markets, your
you don't have to have, like, I drive a BMW car, right? Okay. But I don't have to. I can buy an American car. What I'm saying is there's nothing we need. We don't need anything from these other markets. It's a luxury item. It's an indulgence purchase.
But you sort of have to pick your poison. If you're talking about abolishing the IRS, in that case, you can't. In that case, you're saying the American government has to get its money from somewhere, because it does need money to fund our military. It needs money to fund our various agencies that people would admit are a necessity. Like it or not, we do have to pay our judges. We do have to pay. We have to pay certain people who are going to. There's a certain minimum workforce that America needs, and in order to pay that workforce, you're going to need to raise money for the government one way or another. Right, and that's not even to mention certain social services which people would largely endorse. Whether they're charitable, like whether they're food stamps or housing or things of that nature for the underprivileged or veterans,
I wouldn't endorse any of that.
I mean, a lot of people, okay, fine, you wouldn't, but I'm saying a lot of people would endorse, let's say, various financial services or the VA, various things that we have for people who are handicapped or elderly or in one way or another. Through course of nature, rather than their own.
But I don't think that's where our money's actually going, Joe. I think a lot of we're told this. We're told, oh, if you cut funds, veterans will suffer, and all these horrible things will happen. And I call that the kitten mask propaganda approach. It's where you have this metastatic, bureaucratic, money laundering enterprise like USAID, where billions of dollars are being sucked off into Northern Virginia elites so they can live in $200 million homes. And what they do is they put a kitten mask on what they're doing.
Right.
And the kitten mask is save children from cancer or prevent people from starving. And then when you try to look at their books and you say, wait a minute, we're giving you $10 billion. Where the F is this money? They say, why do you hate kittens? Well, what kind of monster are you? Right. And so I think America can easily address our legitimate spending needs, like the VA, without having to also fund the metastatic cancer that's hiding behind the kitten mask that is the VA.
First and foremost, I agree with you 100% that there's a great deal of waste that can certainly be exposed and should be exposed and removed. I'm 100% on board with you on that. We can sit here and argue as to whether we should be helping handicapped people or the disabled or people who have genetic issues or things of that issue, and that you can argue about whether or not we should be investing in that at all, or whether that's something. I prefer
people who are not handicapped, Joe. I prefer people who are not handicapped. That's my Trump imitation.
Oh, yeah, that's like what I'm saying is that that's not the point. The point is there's a certain amount of revenue, whatever that dollar at number X is, there's a certain amount of revenue that the government needs to have in order to function, and it has to come from somewhere. And if it has to come from somewhere, that means you sort of, and if it's not coming from collecting taxes from us, it has to be coming, in this case, some tariffs. If tariffs, figuring that number out is very tricky. Yeah,
I don't think it's that tricky, Joe. So I think there's room for error, right? We're going to try an approach, and maybe it won't be enough, or maybe it'll hurt people too much, right? Maybe we'll overtax on income tax, and we'll hurt our own people too much, or maybe we'll undertax on income tax, and we won't have enough revenue, right? For income tax purposes, those are the two kind of options. You know what? I say, F that. Let's test that pain hypothesis on other people. Let's do it with with tariffs and excise taxes, and let's see, oh, maybe we'll hurt them too much, or maybe we'll be taking too little and we'll have to hurt them more. But why isn't the pain by default on them? Why is it on us?
Look, as far as trying something outside the box, trying something new, I agree with you that what we've been doing hasn't been working well, and it doesn't seem like it's been applied fairly. So I'm on board with it. I'm simply cautioning that it's going to be an ever-shifting landscape as to what an appropriate number is. Trump threw out there last night the notion of reciprocal taxes, which right away sounds like a great idea, because you're like, hey, look, there are 0 American cars in Europe. You can't find them there because they tax them out of any price range, so that they're basically it's
100%. I lived in the Netherlands. It was 100%.
Right. So they basically like, you're not going to be buying an American car here.
Right.
Because you'd have to be an idiot to buy it, because you're buying something that's worth much less than some European-made counterparts. So why would you possibly do that? And that's why they put those tariffs on. Those are prohibitive tariffs as opposed to income-raising tariffs. Because if you were just income-raising tariffs, then you would just make it a 3% thing. So they can be viable, but America gets a taste of that industry. So, or the native country that's charging the tariff gets a taste of it.
So there's 2 purposes to tariffs, right? Theoretically speaking, one is income raising, like you just have like you say, a 3% modest tax. You're just trying to make a little money, like a sales tax,
the VAT tax kind of thing.
The VAT tax, right? The other is as a weapon of political influence,
right?
We are going to break you with these tariffs unless you bend the knee to our political will. That's what Trump's doing. He doesn't literally want a 25% tax on Canada. Right. He wants trade with Canada, but he wants trade with Canada under certain conditions. And he's going to use the threat of a 25% tariff to do that. All these people on X social media is like, Trump's crazy, 25% tariff. Tariffs never work. They just raise the cost for your own citizens. I'm like, are you literally retarded? Of course he's not trying to do that. He's using this as a leverage of international politics to get the best possible deal for America.
Let me get to some of these chats here. The senators were all told that anyone who votes against nominees would face an Elon finance primary. Murkowski was crying
That's what I said.
already on CNN, saying a billionaire shouldn't be able to do it. That definitely was a factor here. That I think they were scared.
Has George Soros been doing that?
Almost undoubtedly.
Right.
87,000 agents was a pipe dream. First year hiring target after that pass was 5,000. They barely scraped 3,000. Lots of IRS employees are close to retirement. Oh, look at that. I know Josh Wilk, actually. He's a friend of mine.
God willing.
Yeah, so that makes me feel a little bit better. That makes it that we didn't actually hire 87,000 people, but that we actually hired, just a couple of thousand. So it means that he was basically trying to double the size of the workforce with his 87,000 agents, and that it was now we'll be instead of that we'll be slashing 40 to 50,000, which to me sounds like music to my ears. It's not like we've never funded the government exclusively by tariffs before. We funded the government almost entirely by tariffs from founding until the Civil War. Let's do it. All right, I think our bills might be a little higher today than they were first 80 years of existence.
Is America a more attractive target to the world than it was then?
True. Probably. I would think so.
Let me put it this way, Joe. If you were in some other country and you developed a product and you could sell it into America, what would that be worth to you?
If you could, give me one more time.
You lived in a foreign country, you developed a product, you wanted to sell it into America.
Right.
The wealthiest economy in the world. What would that be worth to you?
Right. So you're saying some of those tariffs are not going to be paid by the consumer, but they'll be paid by the country or the manufacturer or the sellers themselves.
Well, there's 2 options, right? So the seller trying to import items either has domestic competition, which will be very difficult for them because Americans will just buy what's locally available, or they'll have something that's genuinely, uniquely valuable that cannot be purchased inside the U.S. It has to be imported.
Like, let's say diamonds, for example, right? Like diamonds coming from South Africa. Okay, so yeah, I mean now there's a nice reserve of diamonds that are here domestically, but after a while that dries up. So in order to get more diamonds, that we don't have diamond mines here in this country.
I think you're a little behind the times here.
I've been to 47th Street. I see my people. I know how they work. But
no offense, but there is a very healthy synthetic diamond industry in America right now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. But some people are fine with synthetic diamonds.
Some people care, but a lot of women would rather have that 3-carat synthetic diamond than the 1/2-carat natural diamond because it looks different on the finger.
Okay. All right. I'm simply saying there are products. I use diamonds as one example. There are products that are just not available domestically. You want to talk to me about potential replacements, and maybe that works. I don't know. Maybe the truth is maybe.
But that's part of the problem, Joe. We struggle to think of things that are not in the U.S. that we really have to import, right? Like for the normal American citizen. Of course, they consume things right now all the time from overseas because it's cheaper. But if they had to, would it not be available in the U.S.?
And I guess what you're saying is, if not in their original form, then sufficiently passable in its modernized form, like a synthetically grown diamond.
Right, and I would expect American industry would jump in to fill whatever gap there was. Right. So if traditionally all the televisions, like I presume America doesn't make TVs, right? I presume all the TVs come from Asia. But if they couldn't come from Asia, America's not incapable of making TV, and those Asian manufacturers are not incapable of putting plants in America to build TVs here.
Yeah.
So I just think we don't really need them. But they need us. They need our markets.
All right. Well, I'm gonna now you're leading me towards raising the next topic on this issue, which came from Congressman Massey. Did you see what he introduced as far as the notion of closing the Fed?
Well, I'm all in favor of closing the Fed. I didn't see his comment though, but. I know
he introduced legislation to actually close the Fed.
Yeah, get rid of the Fed. The Fed is a constitutionally illegitimate enterprise. All these independent agencies, the USAID, the CIA, the Federal Reserve, all of them have no constitutional authority. There is no fourth branch of government under the Constitution. They have zero legitimacy. They were all created when FDR was president, when all this New Deal shit was happening. It's all bullshit. It doesn't actually exist except we pretend that it has legitimacy. It does not. There is no constitutional authority for any of this.
Okay. Let's slow down for a second here. Okay, let's slow down for a second. First of all, I think there's a lot of problems with the Fed. I wasn't going to bring this up. I figured by the time I was going to get to these domestic issues, I was going to just focus with you on NATO, that you were going to bolt on me after an hour, and then I was going to deal with these economic things here on my own. And on this topic, I planned on raising it and telling my audience that I really want to mull over this closing the Fed idea for a day, because I really want to come to it with a deep understanding of all the pros and cons of closing the Fed. I am gonna sort of hold off on that, but you're touching on a different element to this that I hadn't really considered with respect to the legitimacy of that. I'll tell you right now, you want to tell me that it's unconstitutional?
Yes.
I'll say to you, that's arguably so. You can make a strong argument to that point. I think that there's very little chance that this is sort of like a birthright citizenship thing, where I say to myself, if you look at the 14th Amendment and you read it as a textualist, as an originalist, you're not going to find much support for the notion that a woman pops a kid out of her womb, that on American soil, that becomes a citizen under the 14th Amendment.
There is literally no birthright citizenship under American law. It's a myth. It's a fabrication. It does not exist.
Right.
Just all you have to do is look at the debates around the 14th Amendment and that language.
100% agree.
The language means what the authors and ratifiers intended it to mean. And They were very explicit. They never intended it to mean that people who had foreign nationality, who dropped a baby on American soil, those children were Americans. They were explicit about it. There's no ambiguity here.
Right. And I'm 100% in agreement with you as far as from a textualist and originalist perspective. The reality is that you and I grew up in schools that taught us and,
the opposite.
and understood the exact opposite of that. Right.
Of course.
The exact opposite. That anyone born on American soil is an American citizen.
That's why we're in a culture war.
And the reason, and what I'm saying is the fact that that has been the common perception for throughout living history, right? I mean, most of us, that has been the accepted practice for the last 70 years.
And that's why Trump's executive order got slapped down by the judge so quick, because the judge was like, well, this is ridiculous. Of course there's birthright citizenship. Everybody knows there's birthright citizenship.
Right. I grew up as a second grader being told that there's birthright citizenship.
Right. But there was literally zero legal analysis in that judge's opinion. He didn't look at the record. He didn't look at the history. He just has an emotional sense that birthright citizenship exists.
I agree with that assessment 100%. And I think, however, I think the Supreme Court is likely to side with the current perspective.
I don't care.
You're saying you don't care. I'm just saying as far as what ultimately would be deemed legal or illegal. The reason I'm bringing up birthright citizenship in the context of this conversation is to say that the Federal Reserve may be unconstitutional, but even if it were unconstitutional, once something becomes part of our accepted norm and the accepted way that we do things, people start looking at it, looking past the Constitution, and all of a sudden these originalists and textualists start becoming living, breathing interpretations of the Constitution, and they start saying, well, this is what I'm used to, this is what we're all used to, so this is what we're going to continue doing, even though if it's not in the original text, and that wasn't the original perception, that's not what the text actually says, but that's the way everyone's accepted it. There have been millions of people and countless judges, Supreme Court judges, who have all seemed to implicitly endorse this perspective that it is totally fine. So that's why I think that your establishment hawks, like Kavanaugh, like Barrett, like Roberts, are all going to side with the left and saying you have no argument to shut down the Fed. Now, if Congress does it, though, if Congress were to close the Fed, which I don't think he's going to get enough support to do, but if Congress were to close down the Fed, and the question would be, do you need 50 or do you need 60 senators? And that could be a very critical question. But to close the Fed, I think you probably would need 60, though. I mean, my first gut would be you need 60.
So can I get kind of legally philosophical with you for a moment? So
yeah, that's why I started this with you.
So there are some of us who look at the Constitution and say we have to read it literally as intended by the founders, right? How they understood it to be. That's certainly how I look at the Constitution. There are other people today, living people, law professors, respectable people who say, well, yes, but it's kind of a malleable Constitution. We develop, because we're a developing society, we develop practices and norms that may be not quite in the literal text of the Constitution, but they're equally valid as law because our society has adopted them as practices and norms, right? And there is a foundation to that approach because, let's face it, before the Constitution, before there was statutory law, which didn't always exist, there was common law. And what was common law? Common law was the normal common practices of what the courts were doing. That's all it was. It was the norms that people were used to accommodating to when there were disputes and litigation and criminal law and so forth. And it was a big change in the law when we went from common law to actually we defined statutes. And now we said, well, for you to be convicted of a crime, it can't be how people feel about it. You have to prove each and every element of the crime beyond a reasonable doubt. But there is kind of a carryover to that, to the modern constitutional analysis, where there are, I can assure you, there are Harvard law professors who say, well, it's not in the literal text of the Constitution, but we've been doing this, hypothetically, New Deal thing. We've been doing the income tax. We've been doing whatever for so long that we should treat it as if it's just part of our constitutional order. I disagree.
Oh, I disagree with that also.
And I think in there's a variant of the modern world in which bayonets are brought into action to fight that approach. I think those are the grounds for a a legislative, judicial, a civil war. What should our country look like? How should it be governed? What is our governmental order? Is it the Constitution, or is it however we feel about the Constitution on a particular day? And I think that battle, in words, is worth fighting. And that's part of what I do every day, is I'm fighting that battle. I'm trying to push the Overton window away from, well, we've been liberals for so long, we should just accept it, to no. The words of the founders have meaning, have merit, have weight. And I am going to argue for that view of government. Now, of course, other people will disagree, and that's fine. It's a free country. They're entitled to do that. But I know what side I'm on.
Okay. And I'll tell you right now, I look at myself as a quasi-textualist, quasi-originalist. I start really as a textualist, and I might reframe, and then I'll use originalist perspective to sort of, make sense of parts that I don't really swallow or seem philosophically flawed. So I'll sort of use that as guidance, but I'll start from the textualist position. I thoroughly reject the notion of it being a living, breathing thing. The reason I thoroughly reject it is because the notion of looking at the Constitution as a living, breathing thing is so backward to the concept of actually having our Congress just write laws for us.
Well, why have a Constitution at all if it's not an anchor?
Right, exactly. And it's something that any judge can just decide, I'm interpreting it this way. And in case you don't think that's possible, just think about this for a second, okay? The words can change meaning so thoroughly dramatically that if you say, well, this is the meaning of the word, in that case today, and sure, it didn't mean that when this statute was written, but that's what it means today, so we can read it that way today. It's such a backward perspective. Think of how much words can change meaning. The word bad used to just mean bad until Michael Jackson wrote a song that, that basically it was capturing the zeitgeist of the 80s and saying that now bad means awesome. So
I can give you a perfect constitutional example if you like.
Yeah.
It's well regulated. So in the Second Amendment, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In the modern phrase, well-regulated would mean government regulation. The government was issuing rules about what you could do with guns. When that Second Amendment was written, well-regulated meant you had soldiers who could march together in line, who could load their guns and fire them in an orchestrated way. It didn't mean government regulation. It meant that they were efficient in the execution of operating a firearm.
Right. And it had nothing to do at all with having government.
There were no government regulations about guns. There were none.
Yeah. But so the point I'm getting at here is the living, breathing people start gaining more footing and traction when it is something that is accepted, that has been accepted and understood as being the norm for decades and decades. I think
and not in the letter of the Constitution.
Correct. Right. So when the Constitution gets sort of banged around a little bit and certain statutes come out, and those statutes basically seem to brush up and impinge on what the Constitution says, and those become regular conversations both in the courtroom and in social discussion. It is something that becomes accepted, that this is just the way it is, and almost the Constitution be damned. And I have grave concerns that middle section of our Supreme Court will stand behind it. And you can at the end of the day, unless you're calling for civil war, they do have the final say here. That's just the reality. That's the reality of America.
Transiently, Supreme Court justices resign, retire, and others are appointed and confirmed. And to me, part of it is it's our fault. It's America's fault, right? So we haven't been adequately defending the Constitution. It's almost like a guy who has a hot wife, and she's like, "Oh, I'm I'm going to talk to my girlfriends all night on the phone. And then she says, oh, I'm going to go out to the bar with my girlfriend. And then she's like, I'm going to go on a trip to Mexico with my girlfriend. And then she comes home pregnant. It's like,
Right.
well, dude, you should have known. I mean, come on. This was obviously what was going to happen. Well,
Right.
I feel like that's us. It's like we allow these little slight
Slippery
gradual
slope.
degradations against the Constitution. And then we're all shocked when there's like, all of a sudden, there's a ton of gun control laws. When at the founding, there were 0 gun control laws. And not only were there already 0 gun control laws, but just to be sure, they passed the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment after the first for freedom of speech and religion to make sure there would never be gun control laws. And we're still doing it. We're doing it because we allow it to happen. We have to not allow it to happen.
Yeah. No, I agree with you that we need to be more fiercely protective of the liberties that are enshrined in the Constitution. And it's an ever continuing battle, right? I mean, because that slippery slope is always present. We're always going to be like fighting against people who are looking to make things the way they want them, and the Constitution be damned. So, I want to start winding down here because we're at the 2-hour mark here. Consumption tax, probate for poor, self-taxation. Judges are not gods; they can be wrong. Yeah, that's true, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the final say about what the law is. Unfortunately, I mean, like it or hate it. And one of the things that the left loves to do is, they love talking democracy until they get democracy until they get a vote against them, and then they start running to the court to give them what they want. And that's what we're seeing with these TROs against Trump's EOs. Like, oh, we don't like what he's doing. So what if he's the elected leader? We're gonna try and find some doofus judge who came in here 10 minutes ago and get him to overturn what Trump just did. I'd rather buy USA, but hard to find all China. What? But hard to find all China. Everything's made in China. Oh yeah, everything is made in China.
That'll change with the tariffs.
That and in theory that actually could be true. That through tariffs we'll end up starting to change how much manufacturing is being done here. But that's not something which takes place over the course of 6 months, a year, or even one in full administration. That's something which takes years and years to build up. We would need to have, Vance come in and win in 28, because I assume that he's right now, assuming he stays on course, he is the presumptive nominee in 28.
Well, if he doesn't, we're lost. So this is not a 4-year fix.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
It's gonna take decades of America sticking to this policy and saying we're gonna do this, despite likely having some tough times, and being able to weather that storm, both financially, both economically and politically, to be able to actually keep that going, because there are always tough times, and to some degree we're feeling it now as the residue of the Biden administration has hit us with inflation.
We've done it before, Joe. We took us decades to settle the West.
Yeah, but there was a commitment from all sides to settle the West. Over
Not
here,
the Indians.
over here we have this continual battle with the useful idiots from the left. So,
but I would argue only because they've been funded by USAID. They've been funded by this NGO money.
But here's the thing about that. A lot of people say that, but it's the only. I mean, I hate to use the word "only" in context of the number I'm about to say, but it is only $40 billion. I cannot believe that that's the entire machinery.
I don't believe that. I believe it's trillions of dollars.
Well, that's my question though, because USAID is giving out like 39 billion or something.
But it's not just USAID. It's like NOAA, the weather forecasting agency. We think weather forecasting, right? That's the kitten mask. In 2020, they had a budget of $600 million. Last year, they had a budget of $600 billion. And over that so their budget went up 1,000. The National Weather Forecasting Agency, the federal weather forecasters. Okay. So their budget went up 1,000% in 25 years. Inflation was bad, but it was only about 70% over that same period. It became a giant climate, global warming slush fund for these pop-up NGO agencies where Stacey Abrams sets up a green fund for global warming, and she's given $20 billion. This is happening everywhere. This money, this imaginary money we're printing, is being funneled to all these friends and family of.
That's my
of the
question. Where that
government.
$20 billion come from?
That we make it up, Joe. That's why there's inflation. Inflation is the result of a magic money.
Right. No, I know that. Yeah.
Right. So we just make it up, and we don't even have to print it because, of course, Stacey Abrams is not getting $20 billion in printed money. It's just zeros and ones in a bank account. So
Agreed.
we can make up instant money out of nothing, and of course that's inflation.
Agreed, 100%. And inflation is the worst taxation on the poor imaginable because they're the ones who feel it far more than anyone else. But and yes, when you start basically just making up zeros and throwing them out there. My point, when I said where's that money coming from, I didn't mean physically where's it coming from. I mean it's not part of USAID. There's a lot of different vehicles that they've been using to suck this money out of our economy.
USAID is 1%.
Right. It's one exactly. So that's really the question is like where, you know, it's not just USAID. It's also it's the EPA. It's the IRS. It's all these.
It's every agency. So whenever I hear people say, "Well, you know, USAID it's only 1%," I'm like, "Yeah, that tells me there's like 100 other 1% out there who are also stealing my money."
Yeah. I think when they do the military, oh my God, we're going to see so much waste happening there. It's going to make USAID look like.
But they were smart to wait on that. So the right move was to go to the obvious graft where there's no possible legitimate purpose. Because if you go for the military first, where I will agree, that's where the real money is. But if you go for the military first, you're going to immediately get hit with, why do you hate soldiers? Why do you hate sailors? Why do you hate people who've been crippled? Look, here's a guy with no legs.
Weak? Why do you want to make America weak?
Right.
Yeah.
It's smart to condition America to the notion that there's massive fraud happening.
Right.
And then when you get to the military, it's like, turns out it's happening here too.
I think we're going to see military. I think we're going to see in the health industry also. We're going to see massive amounts. We're going to see so much fraud and corruption in our health industry. It's going to be astonishing.
It's, you know, the American people don't understand. If you're a normal, like middle class working American, you've been carrying like 500 pounds of bureaucratic shit on your back your entire working life. And what Trump is offering to do is to shoot that shit off your back. And you're going to feel a weight loss you could not have possibly imagined. Where you'll still be going to work, you'll still be getting your paycheck, but you won't be carrying that horrific load of shit on your back every day. That's the life that Trump is offering you.
Yeah, you know what you were saying reminded me of an old story I heard from my youth, where this guy goes and tells his rabbi that he doesn't know what to do. He's going nuts because he lives in a one-room house and he has 9 kids and is always screaming, and there's always, you know, he's this poor farmer and he's struggling to get by and he can't get any rest, and it's constant noise, and he's, you know, at the end of his rope. So the rabbi says to him, "This is what I want you to do. Get your chickens that you have and bring them into the house with you." He's like, "What?" He's like, "Take all your chickens. How many chickens do you have?" "Oh, I have 20 chickens." He's like, bring them into the house with you. So he brings them into the house. Guy comes back a week later. He's like, "This is insanity. Like, I can't. Now the chickens are clucking all the time." He's going nuts. He says, "Okay, bring your oxen. bring your oxen there." And he has on the week where he brings his oxen there. He's like, and then he comes back a week later. He's like, you know, he's barreling into everything and eating stuff. And he brings in his goats. And then finally, like after a month of this, he says, "Okay, I want you to now take out the chickens, take out the oxen, take out the goats." And when he took it out, he comes back like a week later. He's like, "Oh my God, my life is amazing. It's so quiet in my house now, and it's actually clean." And like all of a sudden, he's like much happier. That's what you're thinking, you know, because once you take out those extraneous crap, and you know you have to live with it for a while, and then you take that burden off of your shoulders, you start to appreciate how livable your life is.
We
And-
used to live, American citizens used to live without an income tax, without a sales tax, without property tax. This is a world that's possible. It's not impossible. It has not always been that way. Now, might it be difficult? Might we have to find revenues from other sources? Might there have to be balances that have to be made? Yes. But the notion that you can never actually own your home because you have to pay property taxes on it forever, or the state will take it, or that every dollar you make, the federal government gets 30%, or every dollar you spend for food, the federal government gets 10% in sales tax, that's a fabrication. That's a matrix that we've created. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be different. We can make it different.
I'm simply saying that politically it's going to be a challenge, because every time there's any sort of financial crisis, it's going to be blamed on this new change that was implemented. Assuming we start to implement some of these changes, that the new change will, whether or not it's the cause, even if it's got nothing to do with being the cause of an economic downturn. That is what we're living in, a post-truth world where facts don't matter, reality don't matter. It's all about messaging, and who's getting the messaging out there. And to the degree that the left-wing media and their grifters come out there and start selling this crap to the American public.
But do they still control the media? Now we have.
I mean, the media. Yeah, no, they've definitely been trimmed back considerably. And it's difficult to measure exactly how much. I'm simply saying that's going to be part of the battle that we're going to have to fight if and when some of these changes start happening and we start facing some economic downturns. That's the point I was making there. So, yeah, let me get the rest of these chats and we'll get on out of here.
Sure.
It was March 2025. Trump had just delivered a speech. Anything was possible reflects nostalgically in 2035. That would be actually very awesome. From your mouth to God's ears. We also had a rant here. I'm monitoring the rants a lot more closely. I'm able to do that. When I have a guest on. I can monitor the rants a little bit more closely here. So let me just pull this up real fast here. You Zellian.
I hope they won't be mean.
No. So far that you've received a lot of love. Joe, what do you think the odds are of them overturning the 1898 Wong Kim Ark case that gave us the birthright citizenship under the 14? You're mistaken, Uzelian. You're mistaken. That's not what it does. That's the way it's been wrongly interpreted.
Correct.
It's been wrongly interpreted. The Wong Kim Ark case, and just to clarify for you, Uzelian, as well as anyone else who might be under this mistaken belief, the reason that the Wong Kim Ark case was decided the way it was is because back in the late 19th century, there were laws that prohibited Chinese people from becoming citizens. So instead, his parents became this sort of quasi-type American, the Chinese version of being a citizen. But they were living here permanently. They had permanent resident status here. They were a whole different qualification than some French visitor who's passing through on a 2-week vacation and pops a baby out in St. Louis, and all of a sudden that kid now is an American citizen because they were born in a St. Louis hospital. These were people who had established their roots here to every way possibly imaginable, and every legal way that they could. They simply could not become citizens. And that's where they said, okay, look, these are people who are actually really in everything but name. They are citizens. Their kid is a citizen. You have to bring him back into this country. That's very different from saying that literally. I mean, think of the madness of this for a moment. Think of the craziness. Imagine we had arrested bin Laden's wife. Okay, brought her over here, held her in a prison, and she got here pregnant. And she comes here in a prison, and every day, every word of her mouth is cursing America and hating America and spitting on America. And you're going to tell me, oh, because we're holding you here in American prison, her kid now is an American citizen. How cockeyed is that? The whole point of citizenship is that you're pledging your fidelity to this country and abdicating your roots to another country. So if someone's coming here and they never go through that process, there's no basis to start believing, which is that Wong Kim Ark stands for them, and as a right for them to their kid to become an American citizen, when the women popping these kids out, they've never pledged that fidelity. They've never proven that they have any sort of basis to be citizens themselves. Won Kim Ark does nothing to actually strengthen the claim of those illegal aliens who managed to give birth on our soil.
So can I add some context here, Joe?
Please do.
So another illustration, a hypothetical I would urge people to consider is, imagine if China invaded the U.S. militarily and they sent 1 million soldiers here to invade the U.S. and they're on American territory and they brought, let's call them comfort women with them. And those invading soldiers and invading women are having children on American soil. Are they American citizens? I mean, that would be insane.
Right.
Obviously, that's not the case. Also, so the Kim Wang-Ark decision is a little bit awkward because they, at one point, they do say, like, well, if you're born on American soil, you're an American citizen. But for lawyers, and of course, Joe knows this, there's the part of the ruling that is intrinsic to the ruling, and there's part of the ruling that is dicta. Dicta is things that the court might say that's not actually relevant to the decision.
Not relevant to the
the
logic,
facts of the case.
to the logic behind the decision.
What they were actually deeply thinking about, and what they were actually deeply thinking about here. And by the way, I still think they're wrong. But that if you have permanent resident aliens and they have a child on U.S. soil, that child would be an American citizen. I think under the 14th Amendment, that's still wrong. The ratifiers of the 14th Amendment were absolutely clear. Unless the parents had exclusive loyalty to America, no other foreign nation, their children, even if born on American soil, were not American citizens. But if you take the Ark case literally, even then, it's only people who were literally permanent residents. America had said, you're entitled to be here as a permanent resident, and you had a child. That's not illegal immigrants. That's not invaders. That's not people here on student visas or work visas. That would be people who have green cards. Yeah. And if I had to compromise, I'd say, all right, I mean, I guess reasonable people could compromise on that level. But that never covers anybody who illegally comes over the border and bears a child.
Well said. And the Fed at 2676 says, artificial interest rates set to drive desired political outcome cause malinvestment, inefficiency, boom and bust cycles. Free market interest rates set adjust to actual market condition signals happens without the Fed. Look, like I said, I don't want to weigh in on an issue that I haven't thoroughly explored. I actually, just to get a feel for it, I started by asking Grok, why do we need a Fed? And they listed off all these terrible calamities that will happen if we have a Fed. And they said, what are the cons of having a Fed? And it listed off all these other arguments. And it was like 5 minutes of showtime. And I was like, I really want to think through these different arguments. And I don't want to weigh in without actually thinking through, because otherwise I'm likely to regret something I say. So I'm sufficiently confident in myself to tell you when I don't know something, and I feel as if on this issue I'm not sufficiently informed to give a public opinion, a vote of confidence in either direction at this point. So that's why I just want to throw the topic out there, because Thomas Massie raised it in a bill today that he wants to end the Fed. But I certainly not going to give my personal opinion on that until I examine this from both sides as best I can, which will take me at least till tomorrow. So,
by the way, folks, that's a lawyer you can trust, as opposed to a hot take internet.
I just don't want to
chasing personality.
I want to make sure that I'm giving an opinion that actually is not based on my gut. My gut instinct would be like, end the Fed. But I really want to mull through what are all the possible downsides of ending the Fed, and I certainly haven't had a sufficient chance to do that. Our grandparents raised 12 kids on one income. Did you like the story, Richard? Did you like the story with the rabbi and the chickens and the goats? You like that? Think we'll see prosecutions on and forfeitures soon? Hopefully. Pam Bondi, you got a lot of work to do, Pam. You have a lot of work. Frankly, if she starts with Congress, that would be very appealing. If she starts prosecuting Congress and all these people who were gifted monies by the Biden administration.
Here's my line between theater, like Pam Bondi theater, and Pam Bondi substance. When I see people go to fucking prison, that's what I want to see. If people are going to prison, then it's substance.
Yeah. Richard Parker pointing out that our goal was reached. I did set a goal before this show where I said more based guests in the future if I manage to get 15 yellow or higher. And we did reach our goal. So I definitely will try to make sure I have more based guests. Because
I'm not that common, folks.
No, most people are not as good as Andrew. That's true. That's true. I don't even know if I put a link to your channel, but I'm going to remedy that.
It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Taxation is theft. 2A equals 0 infringement. That's true. I want to return to get a refund. MAGA, y'all. Well done, Cindy Detour. Well done indeed. God bless you. Member for 3 months. You see, and this is why, because she understands. She understands the Constitution. So,
but it's an interesting question, right? So, say we were to decide as a society, not you and me, Joe, but as a society, income tax bad. It should all be terrorists. Do I get my income taxes back?
I don't think that's going to happen.
I paid a lot of income taxes.
Do you want to know what? You want to know my newest thing that I'm trying to get into the cultural zeitgeist as being bad? Democracy.
It is bad. Democracy is horrific.
It's something that we have been trained since we're children to assume that democracy equals good, and that has to be. It's 180 degrees from reality, and we need to We need to push back on that as hard as possible because they'll literally. You'll see people from the left. Literally, that will be the substance of their entire argument. We have to defend democracy. We have to defend democracy, and it's the stupidest, most ridiculous thing. The only reason you think of democracy as being good. The only reason you think of that is because you think of America as being good and you think of America as being a democracy. But the reason America's democracy works is because it's girded by a very, or hopefully should be, robust constitution which protects us and protects minority states from being swallowed up by larger states. There's so many protections in the Constitution that make democracy work here. Every other country on earth, literally, there is 0 exceptions to what I'm telling you now. There is no other country on earth that comes close to affording the same protections for the minority or the individual the way our Constitution does. And if you don't believe me, try engaging in free speech in the UK and posting something that the government doesn't like on Facebook in the UK or in Australia or in Canada, where they'll freeze your bank accounts if they don't like what you're doing. We are the only country on earth where democracy really works, and that's because of the fact that we have this robust and what has a traditionally robust constitution that is slowly being eroded away. But the democracy as a concept, historically and in modern day, is a disaster. It is an invitation for the majority to completely abuse and destroy the minority. And that's why whenever you hear someone say, oh, but we have to defend democracy, no, you're defending a worse corrupt system, because instead of it being a tyranny by an individual, it's a tyranny by the group, and it is always, always, always a disaster. And long term, it's always a disaster, and certain individuals are being crushed by democracy invariably. Sorry.
Can I add a thought?
Please do.
I mean, the reason, folks, we've all heard of the Bill of Rights. The reason we have the Bill of Rights is specifically to prohibit the federal government from infringing on the rights of the minority, because they were urged to do that by the majority. You couldn't have a majority vote and take away your right to free speech, or your right to own guns, or your right to a lawyer, or your right to a jury trial. The whole Bill of Rights exists to restrain the power of the sheer majority. The founders were horrified by the notion of a pure democracy. They understood ancient Greece. They were all very well educated. They understood that democracy was 2 wolves and a sheep having a discussion about what to have for dinner. So they never wanted that. And when you think about the founders who were smart guys, they established all this. And after fighting a desperate war, who was actually allowed to vote at the founding? And I don't mean it wasn't minorities, and I don't mean it wasn't women. It wasn't even all white men. It was property owners in that time, that was a surrogate for people who had demonstrated the ability to provide value to their society. And we don't do that now. Now it's like a universal franchise. So the person who's the crackhead down the street from me gets the same vote that I get. The founders would have been horrified at that concept. The founders very deliberately limited the franchise to people who were productive members of society, who demonstrably so. They had the burden to prove that by being property owners.
Yep.
And today, what do? We have mail-in ballots. We have ballot harvesting. We have all this nonsense. We have people going to nursing homes with people with Alzheimer's, collecting their ballots from them and marking them out.
Filling them out and signing them for it. And then saying, oh, this is how Rosa Davis voted. She voted all blue. She's in a coma, but she voted all blue.
The universal franchise is a societal death sentence. Not everybody is equally capable of getting society.
Yeah, well, that's actually that's another you can make it's not difficult to make an argument that your right to vote should be contingent on the fact that you actually pay taxes. But
right, and that would be fair, right? And a net contributor to the tax base.
Exactly. If you're a net contributor, then you should decide where you should have an influence as to where your dollars are being spent.
And there could be other measures, right? Like if you're a veteran, if you've been willing to sacrifice your life,
other ways to qualify, 100%.
But these would be objective qualifications for the franchise, not just you're breathing and you're capable of shitting on the floor, and therefore you get to vote.
Yeah. How about all terrible economic events that happen with the Fed? Fair enough. Fair. But my point is, I'm talking about as far as the social and political conversation. That's the way I'm just giving you a heads up as to how it will turn, because I've seen it play out over and over again. That's how it will turn invariably. Is they're going to blame whatever.
Sure. Right.
That's how the conversation will shift. Let's go old school with citizenship arena. Lion, future citizen. Think Daniel. Lion's Den. Yet yeah. Hell yeah. If they live through the Lion's Den, bam, citizen. That would be awesome. Imagine if they had something. What was that movie with Richard Dawson and Arnold Schwarzenegger where he has to try and survive?
Running Man.
Running Man, yes. Yeah, I don't. Was it Running Man?
Yeah, that's the name of it.
That was the name of it? Yeah, where he had to basically survive all those people trying to kill him.
It's like a game show, right?
Yeah, it was a game show. In case you're too young to remember the 80s, it was a game show.
Are we not actually living that
in
reality? Is every American citizen not living that?
To give citizenship is like, okay, how bad you want to be a citizen? How bad you want it? You want to go on this show here where
I got to be honest. I really like this Trump idea of this, not a green card, but a gold card. You pay $5 million. You're fast track the citizenship. I'm sorry, but money matters. Money matters. And it's only going to be 1,000 people, 10,000 people.
Supposedly 250,000 people signing up for his gold card.
That's our deficit right there.
It's not our deficit, but
it doesn't mean they get to vote, by the way. They just get to be residents.
No, that's for citizenship.
No, that's bullshit.
They're buying citizenship. F democracy, stand for a constitutional republic. Amen. Amen. They should take Andrew's class on hard to convict. This is a good time for us to. No? Okay.
I mean, it's fine. So lawofselfdefense.com/hard to convict. I do a seminar on how to be hard to convict if you ever shoot somebody in self-defense. I would encourage you to take it. It matters.
If you're a gun owner and you don't know Andrew Branca, then you're basically exposing you and your family to, God forbid, in a worst case scenario, if you had to defend your lives, that you're going to end up spending the rest of your life in prison. And he basically tells you what you need to do to ensure that every step you're taking is legally defensible.
Right. So, I only hesitate because I just came on here to have fun. I didn't come here.
Right. He's not coming here to pitch.
Right.
Ammo is currency. Keep pushing until we repeal the 19th to restrict voting to land-owning married fathers. We're a long way from that. It's not solely the Constitution. Liberia has the same Constitution as the U.S. The U.S. people with the Constitution are a big part of why the U.S. works. They have the exact same Constitution. That's interesting. Stephen A. Smith was polling as a D because of Donald J. Trump. What? I'm not sure. I know Stephen A. Smith. He's that sports talk show guy. Polling as a D because I don't know what that means. Not throwing short in the Constitution for what it's worth. It's still great, but I don't know if you can give it to another country and replicate U.S. cultural success. That's a fair point.
No,
that's a fair point. That's the it's our nature to it's very well consistent with the values that are already inherent in our culture.
Yes, in fact, John Adams said, I may actually have the quote right here. Let me see if I do. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. Of course, for him, that meant his version of moral and religious. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other people. So America was very specific to a particular cultural, social construct, which was a derivative of Western Europe, largely. But our founders knew that. It's not like they didn't imagine for a million years that like the American government they were creating would be appropriate for Russia or Greece or China. It was unique for America. And if you fundamentally change the culture, well, then it all breaks down, which of course is what Biden was trying to do with his open borders policy.
Yeah. Let me just get to the last couple of things I have here are over in locals. Johnny Reb sharing some of his work here. First and foremost, what is this? Hold on a second.
I see you're getting hate because I kept you too long. Sorry about that, Joe.
No, I'm not getting any hate about that. People are fine with that. He said this is over in locals where Johnny Reb says, Joe and Andrew, the only thing that would be better is if Jeff can join, but we know his legacy lives on. God bless his soul. Yeah, indeed.
A terrible loss.
Yeah, that was very tragic. It was a loss to every one of us, both those of us who knew him personally and those who never had the privilege.
I would suggest Joe was literally Jeff. Was literally the nicest amongst us. I mean, he was
amazing.
Yeah,
he was, and everything you saw in him was so legitimately he was the exact same person on camera and off. There was no difference at all. He also says Crowder did a segment on Germany prosecuting people for free speech. Yeah,
I didn't want to
create a. I didn't want to. I'm not going to. I appreciate you sharing that, Johnny Reb. Those people want to check out. It's called Germany is literally jailing people over memes. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Johnny. Also, I saw Neurodivergent that said I didn't share Bill Dozer's thing. I actually did share it on screen. I didn't like. That was back when we were really going strong, and he thought that I didn't share it. I did share it. I brought it up on screen without reading it, but I'll just sort of call attention to it because apparently he thinks I missed it. What's up, Rumble Ghetto? Thank you so much for the raid yesterday. We got 200 live viewers on Rumble at one point. Good for you. Go get him. Go get him, Bill. And there you go. So that is, I think, our show. Library was U.S. colony, same Constitution. Oh, that's why it was the same. Interesting. I didn't know that. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me.
All right.
On.
Yes.
Great fun for me.
You can
your audience
over at Law of Self-Defense. This channel is awesome and based. You're going to love it. Make sure you sign up over there. And that's our show. This was a phenomenal discussion that was going to it's going to have the country talking for years to come. So you guys know the deal. Don't eat lab meat that's meant for they, them. It's not for you. And don't eat the bugs. Don't eat the bugs. Have a good night, everyone. And Godspeed.
Bye-bye.